Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. You're with Steve Wyss, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Fadugba. This is the Allsvenskan Season Preview 2025. We are recording slightly later than normal. We have had a couple of matches already, but we've got Jonathan in the chair. We're going to grill him proper and good here for this Swedish Season Preview. How excited are you about the 2025 campaign? Djurgården are a quarter-finalist in the Conference League. These should be good times for Swedish football, right?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Yeah, we're back. I'm not sure if it's slightly later than normal. Last season, it was in the second week of the season. We've only had the opening day, a couple of games that have been played today. So hopefully by the time you listen to this, there's only, I don't think that's too bad. Norway always comes first. So, I'm good. It's a great time for Swedish football. I think that obviously Djurgården's achievements, if you're not a fan of certain Stockholm teams, then you'll be pretty happy for them. Actually, in fact, I don't think quite a few of the teams in the league are that happy for Djurgården. There's a lot of rivalries in Swedish football, so I don't think it's necessarily like everyone rallying around them, but DIF can be a little bit of a controversial side in terms of how they're perceived by others, but which we might get into later. But yeah, I think it's an exciting time. I think the league's on the up. Of course, we mentioned about in Norway how the league is very, the coefficient's doing a bit better, and things like the Conference League has helped the league, regenerate itself with funds. Teams managing to go deep. Teams like Elfsborg getting into Europe. Malmö going deep in Europe at times and struggling, but they've had the Champions League run in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. They've been regulars in the Champions League, and other clubs as well having their opportunity. So yeah, it's an exciting time, and I think it's a big season ahead, to be honest, and it's great to be back.
Yeah, it is great to be back. I honestly, last season, I actually preferred Allsvenskan to Itinerary. Had a better feel to it, had better rhythm to it. I like the fact there's no VAR in Sweden. It's the only. Can you name another league of significance in Europe that doesn't have VAR? I can't think of one. I like it how the league flows. A goal is a goal. You can celebrate a goal. So yeah. Look, Malmö won the championship last season. They had 65 points on the board. It was a bit of a kind of a non-event in terms of a title battle. We sadly lost Kalmar, who we've always talked about on this podcast. Sad times there. Just before we go into the predictions, a general overview of how you see sort of the Allsvenskan at the moment, Jonathan. This no VAR is often a talking point, and might be a really attractive feature for new people wanting to get into the league.
Yeah, it's definitely a main selling point. The first 2 games today, of course, Djurgården and Malmö played, and then Häcken playing against Brommapojkarna, and it just felt good not having VAR, no checks. And I think the fans love that. The fans are always going to be complaining about the prospect of VAR being introduced. I saw that there's some efforts maybe in Norway to repeal it, of course, as well. So they're both not too satisfied with the fans of those 2 countries that we cover, and also the fact that in terms of the overall health of the league, I think the league's in good shape. I think there's some exciting teams who are on the up, which we'll talk about, and that will potentially challenge. The Stockholm teams are sort of, there's always drama with them involved. I think the main wish I have this season is that hopefully not as much crowd trouble and not as many games getting stopped, especially big derbies, which I'd like to see less of that, maybe. Games getting postponed for 25 minutes, maybe, things like that. Mind you, there was 17 minutes stoppage time today in the Djurgården Malmö overall because of injuries, which I've not seen that very often in total. 11 minutes in the first half and 6 minutes in the second half, which I found, I was thinking is VAR involved in this. But I think that's my main wish for the season. I think the teams are strong. The managers, there's always a healthy rotation of sort of young upcoming managers as well as players. We've already, today, Steve, I've already had to write off one of my 10 to watch who's just been sold, which we'll come on to later. So we haven't even started the season yet. One's been sold, but you can always guarantee in this league there's going to be exciting talent. There's going to be open, entertaining games. There's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of controversy, a lot of scandal, and there's not going to be a single VAR camera in sight.
Yeah, the crowd trouble was an issue last season. Well, it's been an issue in recent seasons. Hopefully we can get on top of that because it's starting to get a little bit tedious. Plenty of money coming into the league, nearly 44 million euros on transfer income. This is according to Transfermarkt. Transfer expenditures just over 20 million. It's not perhaps at the level of some of the Norwegian teams at times, but there's been plenty of ins and outs. We're going to go through your predictions 1 to 16 now for Allsvenskan 2025. We'll do the first 8 first, and then have a break. So you're going to have to take it away. Who are you predicting to win the gold medal this season, the champions 2025 Allsvenskan? You can take it away, Jonathan.
Yeah, and stay tuned as well. We'll also have the halftime break. We'll drop the Fantasy Allsvenskan code. You can also find it on Twitter at Nordic Football if you haven't already. Just scroll through the timeline. We'll drop the code at halftime for that as well. So I'm sure you might already have your team in, but you might get 1 or 2 tips on this show. I think it is going to be a competitive season, Steve. I think there's a few teams when you're going through the list of teams that can challenge. There's 1 or 2 I think that could maybe stand out this year. But ultimately, Steve, in terms of winning the title, my pick probably won't surprise too many this season. Just like last season, I'm going for Malmö to be crowned champions. I've tried in this past on this podcast maybe once or twice being a bit controversial. I remember, I think it was our second ever year, Steve. I think we've done this 8 years now, and of course, maybe I think 7 years of predictions. I'm pretty sure in the second year I predicted Norrköping to win the title. I went very controversial in the early days, and after a while, I quickly learned you can never write off Malmö too easily. There's been years we've done this podcast where teams like IFK and Djurgården have won the league, but Malmö are very strong, and I think I said last season I expect them to win the league by 10 plus points, and this season, although I don't expect it to be maybe 10 plus points, I think that they're gonna be very comfortable winning the title, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, it's often the safe bet, isn't it, to predict Malmö to win the Allsvenskan. But they've been a dominant club here the last 10 or 15 years. Don't win the title every single season, but 11 points they won the league by last season. 13 wins at home out of 15, just 1 defeat in front of their own fans. I got the feeling that might have been Mjällby who beat them. They usually do. At home, but there was a bit of an interesting similarity between your prediction to win Allsvenskan and my prediction to win the Itinerary, and I would say it's the managers, Kjetil Knutsen at Glimt and Henrik Rydström here at Malmö. And again, perhaps it's a surprise he's still here. Another manager he was actually rumoured to be second on the Brighton manager shortlist last summer. Now they went with the young Boss Herzler from which team did he take? Was it St. Pauli, one of the teams? But for Rydström to be on that list just shows how highly he is rated. So, I mean, it's a surprise that he's still here at the club. And is this the sort of year that he, come the summer, there's going to be vacancies around Europe. Can they keep him this season?
Well, I mean, that is the I probably should have said it at the beginning, but say it now. I've got Malmö to win the league fairly comfortably, but there's a caveat, Stephen. There's a star, I think, an asterisk by that prediction, and that is very much the future of Henrik Rydström and what happens in the summer. I think that whilst there's no real strong rumours that he'll necessarily leave, there's obviously always going to be whispers. I think that would be my major caveat, that if anything did happen, and I feel like, we talked about it in the Itinerary preview, didn't we? You talked about Kjetil Knutsen and how you wanted to get on your boat and dock the waters to go and interview him at the training ground. I think that while he's been comfortable and been there year in, year out, I feel that Henrik Rydström has definitely got a desire. I think he's been pretty clear about it, in fact, that he's got a desire to coach abroad. He's a player that played his entire career in Sweden. He was pretty much a one-club man and very much kind of as a manager. I think he's almost trying to sort of escape his playing career in some ways in terms of his managerial career. He was a sort of a no-nonsense defensive midfielder, and he used to say that he admits that he got bored. He got a little bit bored of football when he was a player in that sense. And the negativity of football, I think maybe Allsvenskan Swedish football in the early days in his career was a bit more maybe conservative. And when he became a manager, he wanted to, quote unquote, make it fun and make everyone enjoy themselves. And that's what his approach is as a manager in terms of playing style. He's got a completely radical style, absolutely legendary achievements at Kalmar, for example, where he finished fourth, playing some of the best football in the league. And, like you said at the top there, they've been relegated now. That just shows you how well he did with them, getting them playing possession style. One of the most entertaining teams in the league. He's gone to Malmö now, Stephen. He's on for a three-peat here. So the days of Häcken, if you think about it, it's quite weird to think now that it was 3 seasons ago that Häcken won the title. That team, that swashbuckling side, have almost been blown away now, really, by Malmö. They've really, the juggernaut is back, really, isn't it? Back-to-back titles and strong favourites this year. And in terms of what he said about what he wants from his managerial career, I think there's a definite attraction that he never got to play abroad really in his playing career, and I think he won't turn down the opportunity to manage abroad. There's been rumours maybe with German clubs, but this is a really, and also I said it to you, didn't I, Steve, on the Itinerary podcast, when you have managers that they start to get a bit of a media profile about them. I've written at least 2 Wyscout blogs about him. I'm pretty sure our sponsors Wyscout. About him. The most recent one was about 2-3 months ago, which you can go and check out on the Huddle/Wyscout blog, our partners, and just talking about his style, how he likes to tilt possession, how he has this sort of, he likes to tilt the pitch in one way. He's very entertaining in terms of all out attack, but he, high possession style, wants to attack in different ways, swaps players in different positions, very sort of like a maestro really. And I think he wants to take that abroad maybe, and I think that will be an attraction for him, especially this year, Steve. I think if Malmö don't do well in the Champions League, potentially in the qualifiers, I think that might be a trigger point for him. So, yeah, he's a brilliant manager. He's done really good in terms of how he's done at Malmö and other clubs that he's been at, Sirius and Kalmar. But there is a question mark. How long is he prepared to stick around in Sweden?
Yeah, and honestly, if he's been on that Brighton shortlist, then I think come June, July, there's a big chance that he could be given offers, and he's going to have to really look at his future. So I think it's fair to say, they've got Malmö probably got the best manager in the league, or one of the best managers. In terms of the playing squad itself, he's obviously of high caliber. Is this the best squad, Jonathan? How do you assess things overall, and how does it compare to last season? Because I think they were weakened last summer when they lost some key players, and they weren't quite as good for me in the autumn. But how they're looking now?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at it, Steve, they, in terms of the transfers, they did have a sort of not as a good maybe second half of the season, but when it counts, they're still the team to beat in that sense. When it came to big games last season, I remember when they played sort of, I think Djurgården at home was one game that stood out in my mind where, they've got that ability to just turn it on when they want. And obviously they started the season today, Steve, with that 1-0 win away to Diff. A big win for them, in an early sort of like 6 points, really, in some ways. Djurgården probably expected to challenge maybe by some. When you look at the squad, I think that it's just absolutely stacked at the end of the day. They've got multiple options. You only have to look at the team today and the bench in terms of like the options that they have. It's ridiculous, really, in some ways. Steve, 60 minutes gone, and Rydström takes off a couple of players and brings on Hugo Bolin, who's arguably the best young talent in Swedish football today. An excellent 21-year-old who I think he's going to have a big season. Potentially even maybe get a move himself in the summer the way he's going. Maybe could be the next Nanasi in that sense, in terms of coming off the production line and getting sold. And of course, then I think, and then he brings on Botheim, Steve, who's probably the most valuable striker in the league as well, for 30 minutes. So, and then Haksabanovic, you've still got Oliver Berg, don't forget, who did really well at Kalmar, for example. He comes on for 10 minutes, and then you look further down the list and you've got sort of like big names. Martin Olsen is still there. And then you've got young talents like Zetterstrom and people like that who will have a part to play in the season. The new signing, Emmanuel Akon, he didn't even get off the bench. That's a €1 million signing from Empoli, who can play left wing, a Nigerian-Swedish player. They brought Johan Carlson in from Kalmar, which I think is a pretty shrewd signing. I think he's got a good track record over the last few seasons, and I think he'll slot in quite well. And that's not even without mentioning, Steve, I think probably arguably the biggest signing of the window for any team, which is Arne Sigurdsson, who's back in Allsvenskan from Blackburn Rovers, obviously. They sold him for, he was sold for a high amount of money, Steve, to when he left, back in the day. when he left Norrköping for €4 million. And he's sort of been around the block. He's played in Russia, then he got his move to Blackburn. But he's had a string of injuries that's not really maybe worked out to the way he would have wanted. And he's come in and he's played 60 minutes today. So you look through the spine of the team. I mean, Pontus Jansson's still probably arguably pound for pound the best defender in the league. Really, I know he's advancing in years a bit, and he's always controversial. Winding up the diff fans today. He came out today and said something about how he doesn't want to talk about some of these diff players because they're not on his level. Because there was a post-match controversy there. They've still got veterans like Christiansen, who went off injured today. To be fair, I think he was targeted by the Djurgården players actually. They seem to be sort of really targeting him, and he ended up going off injured. But they're just stacked in every area. So they've still got players like Taha Ali, Kiese Tellin, who, him and Vasic are the two top league goal scorers in Allsvenskan who were still in the league, from last season. If you look at take out the players who've left, so Kiese Tellin can still grab goals. Every area you look at, Steve, they've still got Busanello. They've still, today Striga Larsen. They've got others in defence who look solid. Colin Rossler, of course. I think they're going to be the team to beat. Really, I know they've lost a couple like Derek Cornelius and those kind of players. Nicholas Moisander obviously retired, but all in all, I really think that this is a strong side. Steve, also Rosenborg, I expect to have a really good season. The 21-year-old now, he's another one who signed from Mjällby. And I think he'll have more of an impact. They've lost Sergio Pena, which maybe is a bit of a loss to them, but I think they've got more than enough, Steve, in the back books to be fine in that sense.
Yeah, they. That's a big win first up against Djurgården. I actually had a look at the fixture list, and they've got a tough start. I'm always a bit dubious how these fixtures are generated randomly, so to speak, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were deliberately been given a difficult fixture list to start with, because they want it to be the league want it to be as close as possible at the start. But they probably didn't want to see them win away against Djurgården in the opening round. But yeah, tough start. In terms of fantasy, I didn't even put a Malmö player in because I didn't like the start they had. But there's so many players to watch. I was going to ask you for 3 players here. Key players that could be massive, but you could pick so many of it, couldn't you? But Hugo Bollin, he's obviously one of the big shining stars going through. He's obviously he could maybe move in the summer, but if you had to pick 3 players to keep an eye on, maybe even fantasy as well, who would you be picking here?
Well, I thought Sigurdsson today was a strange one because he's one I expect he could rip up the league, but I think he's still not quite physically fit. He admits today after post-match that he took a yellow card because he felt that Christiansen was being bullied. So he basically did a bit of a revenge act to try and back his teammates. And I didn't think he was amazing, but he's way too good for this league. He's a really good player on his day, and I think that he could have a massive impact potentially. But I think it's a bit like in the Premier League, right, with FPL, Pep Roulette. It's also going to be like Rydström Roulette, really, which probably rolls off the tongue slightly more nicely. You can't almost predict his team sometimes. He's going to rotate loads. If I was to just keep it brief and say 3 players that I'll keep an eye on, maybe going a bit left field, maybe. I was really impressed today with Lasse Berg Jonsson. I think there was one intervention he made to stop a counter-attack that was basically stopped a certain goal, I'm pretty sure. It was him. I think that you can't ignore Hugo Bollin, as I've just mentioned there. That I think he's a very, very good player. And I'm going to go with the centre-back, Steve. I don't know how much minutes he'll get. Niels Zetterstrom, 20 years old. I like my young talents. I think he's one who will get more and more minutes as the season goes on. He's got to compete with Rossler. And obviously Pontus Jansson is going to be a lock in that position, although he's 34 years old now, more or less. But I think Zetterstrom will be one of those ones off the pipeline with Bollin. And then I think the big one, Steve, I'll just add one more, is Taha Ali. I think this is a big season for him. I think he's got the dribbling skills, probably the best 1v1 dribbler in the league. And I think this is the year really where I expect him to really just become bit more consistent with his game, because he's 26 now. He's not a young player really anymore, and I think that he probably needs to have a little bit more impact. So I think those are the 3, and then Taha Ali will be a bonus.
Brilliant stuff. We will move on to the next team now, but sort of just as a general thing here, if Malmö are not to win the league, kind of what needs to happen here? Because it seems to me like the 2 biggest issues for them or three biggest, if we want to call it that, is potentially losing Henrik Rydstrom as manager, potentially losing players in the summer transfer window, which often seems to happen, and then possibly a European distraction as well. If teams can sort of stay close to them in the first half of the season, might there be a chance that they can get toppled? Because last season they were gone really at the halfway start. They had a brilliant start. So is it a case of teams have just got to stay close to them, Jonathan, to give themselves that chance?
Yeah, I think that there could. The only thing that I could see happening is maybe an element of complacency. But then again, you didn't see that in today's game away to Djurgården. They've already basically gone to one of the toughest places to go and won. But I think that there is maybe, if you look at the team that started today, really, Steve, if you look at the backbone of it, you've got 32-year-old Kiesa Tellin, you've got a 34-year-old Christensen who went off after 45 minutes injured. You've got, Rosengren and Jonsson are kind of a bit younger, but then you've got Pontus Jansson again, who's 34, and Ricardo Friedrich, who's 32. So there is an aging spine to that team. Botheim, players like that can come in. That's the only thing. Oliver Berg, even he's 31. So it's kind of, there are some players that are getting on a bit, and I'm not sure how good some of the transfers have been, to be fair. I think the jury will be out on Ekong. I think Sigurdsson's got a bit to prove because just of his injury history. So the only thing I could see is maybe complacency maybe in the transfer market, and also complacency in terms of maybe they just take their eye off the ball. Maybe they focus too much on Europe. I think fans this season, Steve, want a good European run. They're looking at diff and thinking, if they can get to the last eight, we're supposed to be the big dogs of this town. Why can't we get into, the last eight of, for example, they should be going deep in some of these competitions, I think Malmö fans feel, or at least not going into the Champions League like they did a few seasons ago when they were in Chelsea's group and just getting battered by most of the teams. I think the Malmö fans want a bit of a European run, and that could maybe sidetrack them into the summer. Those are the sort of three areas. And the only other thing I would say, Steve, is I think there's one or two teams we're going to talk about in a minute that do maybe have a look about, like maybe they might have the bit between the teeth. And if one of them can pick up some consistency, that's going to be the key. Can any other team just keep that level of consistency and really challenge what is a very strong team in Malmö?
Yeah, they did make some progress last season in the Champions League qualifiers. They got past PAOK, famously, the Greek team, and ended up in the Europa League. If they'd actually gone in the Conference League, maybe they would have got this deep as well. The Europa League is more difficult. Right, okay, so that's your prediction, first place, Malmö. That is also the media prediction. Of course, we always have a look at the media predictions for the Swedish Allsvenskan. You're going to tell us who you've gone this off. But anyway, who are you predicting for second place, the team that can perhaps get closest to Malmö this season?
Yeah, it was a tough one. And of course, if you look at the league table last season, maybe I'm sort of just riffing off last year. I believe that I think the year before I predicted them to be, I can't remember where I predicted them last season, actually, Steve, but they ended up finishing second. And I'm going to have them in second again. I think that the main challenges I see this season are Hammarby. I think they're going to be a strong team this season. I think they have strengthened quite well. I think they had a really good year last year. I really liked what they did. I think they've got a good management team. Of course, we've had David Salini, and they've got Kim Hellberg, obviously now not a veteran, but he's been around the block now with Värnamo, and obviously now at Hammarby, his first season, last season finishing runner-up. I think that they have signed well, although it's not too many signings, Steve. That's always, there's quite a few signings, but I think one of my criticisms of Hammarby has always been they've had so much rotation that it's almost too much. This year, I think it's kind of evolution, not revolution. They brought in the likes of Paulos Abraham, who they snatched from IFK's noses. He was pretty much a done deal it was quote unquote a done deal. I think some of the staff at IFK actually came out and publicly said the deal was done. And then the next thing you know, he was in a Hammarby shirt, Steve. So I think he's going to be potentially a really good player this season. Obviously, former IFK man, so that's an interesting one. They've got a young player from Haugesund called Sebastian Tunekti, I think, who will get some game time as well. So, you might tell me a little bit more about him. But in terms of departures, the main thing that makes me worried about maybe challenging for the title itself is obviously the loss of Basumana Toure, the 18-year-old who had a brilliant season last year. It's funny, I was listening back to our season preview podcast from 2024, and he didn't even have a work permit at that point. I remember I mentioned in the pod that if he could get his work permit, he would be a player to watch potentially. Well, he did get his work permit, Steve, and he had such a big impact that he was sold for 10 million euros to Hoffenheim, which are a massive transfer, one of the biggest in Allsvenskan history. And I think that is a big loss. I think so that replacing him is going to be on the shoulders of the likes of Abraham, maybe, and also maybe Montada Majed, who he's been on. I think he's already been in my 10 to watch in the past when he was like 16, 17. He's now 19, but I feel like he's been around for quite a while. But yeah, this is the team. I think it's got a strong squad. I think that they've kept a little bit of continuity as well, which I think is important. And I think they're sort of mature in years enough for me to suggest that they can sort of continue that consistency and start to challenge for the title.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing that stands out when you look at their transfers in and out this window. 15 million euros they've recouped, 10 million of that from Basumana Toure. I'm pretty sure that was the lad who I criticised quite a bit last season off the top of my head. Very pacey player, stretches the field a lot, but did have a habit of missing a lot of chances. Scored 9 goals, 3 assists as well. I mean, I wouldn't have paid 10 million for him. I mean, Hoffenheim, I think that's poor business from Hoffenheim. Great business for Hammarby. But, you know, they've obviously got quite a bit of money in there. They've spent a few quid as well. You like the signings there, Paulos Abraham. That looks a very good signing. Tonekti from Haugesund, not really. It doesn't really. I wouldn't have paid 1.2 million for him, but it might work out. He's sort of one of them players that does have a ceiling potentially if he can get the right sort of tune out of him. Technical player. There's a lot of technical players in this Hammarby team, isn't they? This time last season, I think we both agreed they were one to watch for 2025 because the manager has now had 12 months at the club, or longer now, 15 months or whatever it is. And he's a major asset for Hammarby, isn't he, this manager?
Yeah, he's a major asset, Steve. I think he's one of the best managers in the league. I think he proved it at Värnamo. I think they finished 6th, wasn't it, a few seasons ago? Or top 7, certainly. And that was pretty much what prompted him to get the job. You know, we had David Selin, as I mentioned a few years ago, his assistant on the podcast when they were at Värnamo, and you know they had such a small staff to go into the infrastructure at Hammarby, which is a big club. He's only going to benefit from that, and I think what he created, I think, at Hammarby last season, Steve, was a team that was quite reliable. You know, quite good in transition phases, quite good in possession game, quite strong defensively, all round just a solid team in every different phase of play. I think they offer different solutions, and to me, that's something that I really like. And but you know, he's 37 now. He's also got the experience as well in Allsvenskan, and it's just a case of can he get this team consistently well enough to really challenge what's going to be a juggernaut in Malmö. My only worry, Steve, is just the small alarm bell was, of course, the 4-0 battering they took in the Swedish Cup against IFK Göteborg, which, you know, that did stun me, to be honest, in pre-season. I still can't really believe that happened. And it was, although they did have some rotation, you know, you could argue the likes of Pinas didn't start, Irabi didn't start in that game. They still had the likes of, you know, Bissara playing, Abraham playing, obviously, which IFK fans enjoyed rubbing that in because, you know, he, obviously, like I said, they stole him from under IFK's noses. You know, they still had quite a few good players in that team. So I think that's a bit of an alarm bell, getting battered in that way. But if they can keep the concentration, you know, players like Pinas, Wanahan, I think is a really good goalkeeper, for example. I remember it at IFK, and I always found it strange how they kind of just basically let him go. Hammarby did good business there, I think, bringing him back, and I think last season he proved that with a solid campaign. Yeah, the manager is a very, very good manager, but I think he's also a bit under the radar in terms of maybe getting a bigger job. You know, because he's gone to Hammarby, I don't expect him to leave this season, really, unless something really goes wrong or right. I remember there was some Sunderland links a few seasons ago and that kind of thing. But I would think that if you were having a bet on it, Steve, I think you would predict him to be more likely to stay than, say, Rydström. And that could be a deciding factor, you know, who can have the continuity. I know you like a bit of Hammarby, Steve, in terms of, you know, they've got a good crowd, good fans, you know, they get good attendances. They are a bit, for those who are new to this podcast, maybe they are a bit Spursy. They do have that reputation of being a bit of a Spurs type side. They can flatter to deceive when it counts. But why not challenge for the title? I mean, if you look at their history as well, they've, for such a big club, they've not won that much really, relative to what you'd expect compared to the other two Stockholm giants. But why not challenge this season? I think the onus is on them. And I think that they've got a mature enough squad that they should be looking for that.
Yeah, I do like Hammarby, and I have a great deal of respect for all of the major Stockholm clubs. The fans just bring it, don't they? So well supported. It seems like it'd be a great city to go and watch football in. Talk to me about Besara, the second most owned player in our Svenskan fantasy, Nahir Besara, and also it wouldn't be an episode without a bit of goalkeeper talk. Werner Hahn is one of the most owned goalkeepers in the game as well. How important are those two players going to be? And is there another player who would you consider to be really massive for them this season?
Yeah, well, Hahn I just touched on. I'm surprised, like I said, that he was let go by IFK. I think there was a sense that they obviously got Bishasari's come through. We'll talk about IFK in a bit, but I think that there was a sense that they were covered in goal. And I think Werner Hahn, I think, to be honest, the way he was treated, I think he's had some public comments where he said that he didn't really like the way he was treated by IFK. So I think it was just a smart move for some Allsvenskan club to bring him back. I think he went to Asia somewhere, maybe, potentially. Can't remember exactly where he left. But yeah, I think he's a really good player. Besara, Steve, obviously is a veteran. He's the captain, 34 years old. Some of the goals he scored last season, sensational goals, and he's a big game player. Stockholm derby time, he's one of them that you can kind of look at and, he really is the figurehead. But he's getting on in years, to be fair. Like I said about the likes of Christensen, Allsvenskan's not a massively taxing league compared to, say, the Premier League, for example. I think a 30-game season, with quite a long summer break, you can manage it. But the legs do get on a bit in years after a while, and there will be expectations on him. I think from what you've asked me there, in terms of maybe players to watch, I think that one of the players in my Y-Scout blog for this season, players to keep an eye out for, I think Youssef Arabi, 21 years old. I think that he's one that I think there'll be a lot of eyes on him this season. I know there was strong links to abroad. Leeds United, your team, Steve, who maybe they need someone who can put the ball in the net to sort of get you over the line in some of these last-minute goals you concede. But he's one that was quite strongly linked to Leeds and Hull, and he's been linked to, I think, Genoa as well and other top clubs. He's a player that I like. I think in the box, he's very sort of someone who can get his head on the ball. He's a good sort of strong physical presence. There's not many of those sort of target men types around in football anymore, are there? Who can just get between the posts, get on the end of crosses, and they have got quite a few good crosses of the ball at Hammarby. Besara can whip one in, Pinas can whip one in, for example. They've got a few others. So I think that he can get his head on things. Yeah, trying not to sort of make any sort of puns there related to that Hammarby left back and getting your head on the things. But we'll move on. So no, Arabi I think is the one in terms of, you've asked me for maybe a potential wildcard or a fantasy wildcard. But to be fair, Steve, in some of the games he's in pre-season, it's looked like Tunekti has been the one that they've chosen, and maybe there'll be some rotation there at Hammarby. But yeah, all in all, and the one thing you can always guarantee about Hammarby is they'll have a young talent that will break through. Maybe it'll be Majed this season. A bit of a Messi-like player, very good technically, 1v1 situations, very small, diminutive player. I was so excited about him, Steve, a few years ago. I put him in my tent to watch it about 16, 17, I think it was. Not quite had the impact in that sense, but let's hope he gets a lot of game time this season.
Yeah, I do have to agree. I think Pinas is a key player. I do rate him, actually. Another player highly sought after in fantasy. I know that a lot of people are a huge fan of him. The media prediction for Hammarby is generally third. I mean, we're going off Irma Helen Zibanejad's tips here. You've put them one higher, that they can go and challenge Malmö here. I've had a lot of people messaging me recently, Jonathan, about obviously Djurgården's run into the Conference League quarterfinals. I think there's a lot of people out there who presume that Djurgården are the best team in Sweden. I've seen them down quite low in a lot of predictions, though. fifth or even sixth place. The Conference League quarterfinalists, you are predicting this season for third, which is a bit more optimistic than a lot of quarters. So what do you see in them here that you think they can get into the medal positions?
I think this was one of the tough ones, Steve. It was toss a coin. I'm not 100% sure. There's two teams that I have sort of I think that could do it, but Diff I've gone for just simply because of the momentum that they have. You know, the new manager is doing well, and I'm excited to sort of see how he can evolve things. There's a team that sort of IFK beat in the Swedish Cup, so that that's an interesting one. They beat away from home, but if you look at the first team squad, Steve, to be fair, I don't want to do what you did live on air, but there is a sort of part of me wanting to do a mid pod change, to be honest. But
higher or lower?
I'm not going to. I'll stick with my guns. I just think that they need to challenge this season. I think it's an important year for the club, and with the sort of crest of a wave they're riding with the European run, that is going to give them a lot of impetus and a lot of confidence. So I will keep them in third, but it's going to be marginal. I really think that they could drop one place potentially.
They are one of 5 teams who have changed their manager this winter, and it became a bit of a mess, didn't it? The back end of last season, the joint managers were sent packing. We had an interim manager, Robert Bjornstjö, and now they've brought in a Finnish manager called Jani Honkavara. What do you know about him so far? What have you made of them in the Conference League? Is he the right fit for your guy? And obviously now moving to one head coach.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say about him is he's very highly rated. He comes with a good track record. People behind the scenes say he's quite a stern manager when he wants to be, but also quite a friendly face. Puts his arm around players. The joint manager situation, it didn't really work out in the end, did it? I think it ended sort of in tears really towards the end of last season, the way things went. Obviously, they were sacked after a behind closed doors match, basically, that they lost because the game had to be postponed till the next day. Quite a sad way to go out, really, isn't it? 20 minutes after a game ended that took place 24 hours earlier, in front of no fans, you get the boot. But Honkavara has come in. He's got a good track record, Steve. He's won things. He's been Finnish champion twice. He has been the assistant manager of the Finland national team as well for a period of time. He was at Cups, Steve, and averaged 2.03 points per game over his spell there for sort of a year, just about 2 seasons back to back, really. He's been at SJK as well. He's had 2 spells at Cups, in fact, and he's also been Helsinki manager. So, he's been around for quite a long time, even though he's only a 49-year-old manager. So he's still quite young. Tends to reportedly prefer a 4-2-3-1. If we look at the game that they've played today against Malmö, that's pretty much how he approached it. I think that he's very highly rated, but I think I did see signs in this game today, and it might just be because it's against Malmö, so maybe it's a bit of recency bias, but I did think they look a little bit short in some positions that made me start to wonder, will it be third or fourth, if I'm being completely honest. But let's look at the positives, and let's look at who they've brought in. I mean, there's a player that you mentioned on the last episode, on the Itinerary preview, Nino Zugay. He's come in. He's formerly Buda Glimt, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on him. He was on the bench today, but one maybe could be one to watch. They've got the likes of Schuller in midfield, who's a bit of a veteran now, 33 years old, and Daniel Stenson, who caused a bit of drama today in the game against Malmö. Danielson's still there, missed a massive chance at the end. How did he miss this chance if you go back and watch it in the last minute to equalise? So they've got that solid sort of back four. I think that a potential breakout player this season is Keita Kosugi, the Japanese left back. I think he'll be one to watch. And, Jakob Brinner as well. He's an old goalkeeper, but, they've got him there. Arslund, I expect better things from him this season, the 22-year-old. And Gullikson as well, Tobias Gullikson. And then up front, Tokmak Nguyen at the moment is the one who looks like he's going to get that starting place. And I think, I mentioned it on Y Scout, I think he's someone who I think they described it on the blog as the breakout players, but he's 31 now. So I mean, the only place he'll be breaking out is probably the retirement home in a few years. But I think that I think from the point of view of he can break out and have a big season. I think that's what I wrote, why I included him in that list of players to keep an eye on, because I think that a bit like maybe Nikola Vasic, who in his 30s last season ended up being the Allsvenskan top scorer. I'm not saying Gwen will be top goal scorer, but I mean he has got something about him. He hit the bar today from about 20 yards, 10. Nice shot that looked like it was sailing into the net. He's got a bit of a maverick about him, and I think that he'll probably. It looks like he'll get more minutes under Honkavara. He was in and out of the team last season at times. Got a red card as well, which didn't help him. A couple of injuries, but all in all, I think that they'll challenge for the top medal spot, Steve. Maybe the bronze medal in that sense. But I do think there's one other team potentially that could challenge them for that bronze medal.
Yeah, I mean, the big question mark, I suppose, is how do they replace Dennis Hummet, who has moved out to Gambo Osaka in Japan. It was quite a late transfer, I think, as well in the window. It wasn't something done in January. So, I mean, that might be where Tokmak Ngwen, I agree with you. I followed his career for a while. There's something about him. And I would love it if he had like a really big season. Just a sort of very likable player, I think, in a lot of different ways. Plenty of quite a decent amount of players coming in and out of the club. It interests me that Hampus Findel's come back. He went to Norway into Viking. He's now back at the club. And you say they're a bit light in certain positions. Maybe they can address that in the summer window. They're not. Are they going to be in Europe or not this season, Jonathan? I'm not sure if they are going to be. And if they're not, I think it would depend on the winner of the Swedish Cup. If they're not, then that will be a boost for them. They'll be able to fully focus on the league going into the second half of the campaign. But where the goal is going to come from overall? Because Hummet is difficult to replace.
Yeah, to be fair, I'm just looking at Hummet's goals. He actually got more goals than I expected, than I realised last season. To be fair, in Allsvenskan anyway, came up with a one hat trick, obviously against Brommapojkarna, and he also got 2 on the last day of the season, which boosted his numbers a little bit. But I don't know. I like Dennis Hummet. I mean, he did end up with 25 goals in 49 games for Diff overall, and his overall Allsvenskan record is 41 goals in 151 games, which is okay, but I don't think it's like irreplaceable, Steve. I think he's a good player, but I've always been a little bit up and down with Hummet. I think he can be replaced, if I'm being honest, but I think you've touched on a good point there, which is that I do think that Bosse Anderson, the sporting director, might be a bit busy in the summer. They've got maybe young talents like Lucas Bergvall's brother, Theo Bergvall, who was on the bench today. A young talent who maybe want to sort of maybe get some minutes. They're always quite good at picking up players from different places. I think entering the Japanese market, for example, is an interesting one. Kosugi, as I mentioned, I would expect them to strengthen a little bit. And as we mentioned on the a couple of episodes back on the European, when we talked about Europe, the money that they've had injected into that team this season, close to 10 million euros from their European run, is just a massive amount of money really for Allsvenskan level. That is going to really help them, and I think they could keep their powder dry for the summer and just go into the market and maybe get 1 or 2 players, because I think they're 1 or 2 players short of like a proper title challenging team. Maybe 3. I think they're probably 3 or 4 from the title challenging team, and maybe 2 or 3 from like a top 2 team, if that makes sense. A lot of things to prove for a few of their players in that team. I want to see a bit more from the likes of Falenius. I want to see a bit more from the likes of Aslund. They've got a young kid called Matthias Siltanen. Steve, I think it could be one potentially to watch as well, an 18-year-old. Quite a few good things said about him. Obviously, he's come from Cups, so maybe that's one of Honkavara's. Maybe he sort of earmarked him as someone that he could integrate. Also, a 25-year-old striker called Zacharias Sewo, who came on and he did all right, actually, to be fair to him. Today, he's previously been at Start, Stephen Harris in Cyprus. He looked like quite a strong player. Maybe someone could be a bit of an option off the bench. And August Prisker as well is someone who maybe could be looked upon. He's been at Midtjylland, young PSV, and Eindhoven. Maybe he can have a bit more of an impact than he did last season, but I think they'll be up there. I think that the fans and the mood around the club is really positive, and I think that could carry them. this season, especially into the first half of the season. And then if they can get to the summer with, their nose is clean and in a decent position, Steve, I think they could probably strengthen. I think Bosse Anderson's always looking for bargains. So I think that's when they might go for it with transfers.
I think they're a sleeper team to finish the season really strongly. I've just looked at the European situation. One of Djurgården or Häcken will not be in Europe, depending on the winner of that Swedish Cup final. I think whoever of those two teams isn't in European competition, they can really make the most of that. No qualifiers and stuff to worry about. Moving into the team now that you have predicted in fourth place. Now, I've seen a lot of people mega high on this team. Maybe not quite so high on them. I think even I was getting a bit excited about them last season to a degree. But the fourth place team, who are you going to go with?
Well, I am quite high on them, to be fair. But I've seen like, as you just mentioned there, like the media has predicted them, I think, in second place, which is very interesting. Considering they finished 7th last season, but I think there are mitigating circumstances which I can kind of understand, to be fair. But the team I have in fourth place, Steve, is Elfsborg. I think that's a good team. I do think they can be in third place as well. I think it's going to be paper thin. But yeah, I've gone for them in fourth.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed with how they conducted themselves in the Europa League in the autumn. They really gave some decent sides a bloody nose and weren't that far away from even qualifying for the playoff round. And eventually lost to Spurs. And a big part of that, I thought, was the new manager. One of the best looking managers in the league, actually, for sure. And I think he transformed them. But their league form did suffer. Obviously, now they can focus on Allsvenskan matters entirely. A team that came so close to winning the league famously a couple of years ago, it should have been theirs. We can still see that 2-on-1, can't we? Which would have secured them the league. It's very painful viewing. And I do hope one day they get their sort of their revenge on, or whatever you want to say about that. But I mean, this Elfsborg team did look very good in Europe. What are you most excited about them here in their quest to be a medal contender?
Well, I think the thing to look out for, Steve, I mean, if you look at Diff and the reason that I've got them in third, I don't actually think they had a very good season last season, and yet somehow they ended up in fourth place. Whereas Elfsborg last season, I predicted them to finish third, and they ended up 7th. I think Elfsborg are a bit more of a hit and miss team. Djurgården have got they're quite strong at home. They're quite reliable. You can always sort of bank on Diff to not always get the job done, but you always know they're going to be, like I said last season, even though their managers got sacked, they still end up in fourth place and had a pretty good Conference League run. Do you know what I mean? They've got that kind of tradition and history about them. Elfsborg are slightly different in that sense. I think they need to hit the ground running, and we've seen how well Jimmy Tillin did, and then he had a great start at Aberdeen, didn't he? Has gone off the boil a little bit in the latter part of the season, but he had a fantastic start at Aberdeen. Fans were comparing him to Ferguson at one point, but we've seen the legacy that he created at Elfsborg, and like you said, the manager, who I do think you've got a bit of a man crush on, to be honest, because you have made a few comments about his looks a few times now, Steve. But he came in last season and like you said, held the fort well in terms of Europe. And don't forget they've lost quite a lot of players as well over the last year, and that is a bit of my worry is that have they got the continuity? Have they got that right? Because they have lost quite a few. If we go and look at the transfers, Steve, I think that's the area that I do have some maybe question marks. I think that I happen to know a couple of people behind the scenes at Elfsborg in terms of their recruitment, and they are fantastic at what they do. Certainly very thorough and very diligent. So I don't think that it'll be for the want of trying. They've got very good contacts and they tend to get good players. But if you just look at the sort of talent they've lost over the last sort of even just over the last since the season ended, Steve, they've lost Andre Bowman, they've lost Kevin Holman, who are maybe players that they can afford to lose potentially. They've lost Aaron Gudmundsson to Brann. They've lost Marcus Bundgaard, the goalkeeper, which is fine. But they're 3 players that I think they're really going to miss, Steve. Potentially Michael Baidu, of course, who had a fantastic time of it in the last few years. Always looked like he would eventually get a move, and he did get a move to the Championship. In the end, with Plymouth, obviously, he had a bit of, pulled out a few goals in the Europa League, and managed to sort of get his move. Has always had a really good reputation in Sweden. He's gone. He's someone who can pull up goals and assists. Timothy Uma Steve, who I'm not sure they wanted to lose him so early. You know, he's a 20-year-old central midfielder who was really starting to look good. He's gone to Slavia Prague for €2 million. And then Ahmed Kassem, who I think is a really good talent, to be fair. And I don't think we saw enough of him, to be fair, in Sweden. You know, he was in and out of the team at times. He never really cemented himself as like a top player. But I do think he has a big talent about him. And that's reflected in the €4 million transfer to Nashville, Steve, in MLS. So those three players are big losses in my opinion. I think they'll be tough to replace. They've also sort of loaned out a few players. You know, Jalal Abdullah has gone out on loan, who I thought was starting to look okay. You know, up front maybe potentially. If we look at the incoming, Steve, they've brought in Simon Olsen on a permanent deal, €1 million from Heerenveen. He'll be sort of quite a solid contender. You know, he's been around the block, hasn't he? And he knows how to get things done. Rasmus Wikström, I think, is a good signing from Mjällby as well in defence. So I think that's potentially a good sign. And then there's a lad from Fredrikstad, Steve, who you might tell me about, Julius Magnusson, that they've paid quite good money for there. So a few others are sort of squad players potentially, or players who might look to compete. The likes of Taylor Silverholt, Lucas Hag Johansson, probably be a backup goalkeeper. I've always quite liked him, to be fair. He's been around. He's been at Bromma, been at Kalmar. Daniel Granley has come back on a free transfer, on a free transfer from Den Haag. So I think my big question, Steve, in terms of challenge for the top three is, how does the squad recover from losing sort of three really important players in those forward areas? But if you look at the squad in general, they do have a lot to be excited about as well. I think they've got some good players as well, overall.
Yeah, a lot of players leaving the club, a lot of ins as well. It could take them some time to settle down. I do like that signing, Julius Magnusson. You're right, they paid nearly €1 million for him. Solid player. Do rate him. I think he could go pretty well for them overall there. So you got Elfsborg in fourth position.
I just want to say, if I may, about Elfsborg, one thing before we move on.
Yeah, of course.
Just a couple of players to watch, because I think that I need to, although I've talked about players who have come in, there's some players that I definitely don't want to ignore. Steve, if that's okay, I think just keep an eye out this season on a couple of players. Firstly, I would say that I think Besford Zanelli could have a potentially good campaign. I think that there's one to watch definitely, though, Steve, who, you know, when it comes to 10 to watch duties, he might be fairly popular. For me, I think there's a player that they have called Gottfried Rapp, who I think that you know, he might not be a hip hop fan, but he could rap his way to the top of the charts in terms of the eyes of scouts. I think he's a really good looking talent, 20 years old, plays on the left side, but can also play across the front line. Potentially, he's scored quite a few good goals in pre-season, Swedish Cup and things like that. I think also Steve Terry Egbe is potentially a centre back who maybe, you know, at 23, 24, he is obviously a little bit older now, but I do think might be one who might potentially look to be maybe get a move this season. So yeah, just wanted to shout out those two players, Steve, because I think that you know, I think Rapp is one to definitely watch.
I actually have Rapp in my fantasy team. Picked him literally on name because I like the name. I always did like a bit of rap, actually. Bit of rap music. I don't mind it at all. Zanelli is the most owned fantasy player in their squad, but I think it's mostly because he's like a filler player for $6 million. What type of midfielder is he? I was doing a bit of research into this player. Is he box to box? Is he holding, deep line playmaker? Because I was struggling to define him.
Bit of an all-rounder, to be fair. I mean, he's got a bit of flair about him. I would like to see a little bit more of him, if I'm being honest, in terms of, like, sometimes I do think I think he needs to offer a bit more this season. You know, I think that the short answer, I guess, would be, you know, he's a lad from their academy, left-sided winger. He can get assists, he can get goals. There was a few games last season, Steve, where he either came off the bench or he was started, and, you know, he doesn't maybe get the full 90 minutes, but there's a few games that he comes on and he changes the match, or he can have a big impact. Yeah, I think he is a bit of a talent. So yeah, he's a good technical player. In terms of rap, Steve, people have said about him. I mean, I just drop you a quote from, I know you like a bit of rap, but Niklas Hult said, "I have high hopes for Rap. I don't want to put too much weight on his shoulders, but he has something that not many people have. Hopefully he can really help us." So I think that I think he's going to be, I mean, if you've put him in your team, I don't think that's too bad a decision. But Zanelli, just one to watch, in my opinion. And like you said, maybe it is a bit of a filler option as well. But I think he can have a bit of a breakout season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Elfsborg progress this season. You are predicting them in 4th place. Media prediction of 2nd. I've seen a lot of people predict them as the most likely challengers to Malmö this season. Rounding up that top 5 is a former Allsvenskan champion. Who are you going with?
I've gone BK Häcken. I think that originally I did consider them maybe above Elfsborg, but I'm not massively convinced that the squad is maybe strong enough. Interesting times at Häcken because they've got a new manager, the tried and trusted Jens Gustafsson, who's obviously been around the block. And as always with Häcken, really in recent years, there's been quite a lot of activity in the transfer front. Gone are the days now of sort of the Benny Traorés and those kind of players. Seems like such a long time ago, doesn't it? Now Razak and that lot who were so influential, had such a good run in Europe. They've lost a few more kind of players of that generation. I know it's only 2 or 3 years, but in Swedish football, 2 or 3 years is like a generation, really. So Romeo Aman has left. He went to Rapid Vienna, which I think is a big loss. Good move, really. I think he's a good player. Maybe could have gone to a slightly bigger league. I'm not sure, but I've always quite liked him. They've finally said goodbye to Evan Hovland, of course, 35-year-old veteran. He's gone to BP, in fact, which is an interesting move there. Lindahl has gone as well. Ali Youssef gone to Cyprus, who he had quite a big influence at times last season. So from that point of view, they've lost a few. But with Häcken, they're always going to bring in a few. You had some words about Bryce Wembangano, who they've played 1 million euros for from Glimt. Funnily enough, internally, they came out and said publicly that they expect massive things of him and he could be the difference maker for them this season. So I think there's high hopes, although you're not massively big on him. I think there's high hopes internally at Häcken that he could have a big impact. Didn't do too much today in the 2-0 win against Brommapojkarna. I think he went off after 60 minutes. They've got a young 20-year-old midfielder called Silas Anderson, Steve, bought from Utrecht for €1 million. Leo Vaisanen's come back, former Elfsborg man. He is returned from MLS, and I think that's a quite good signing, actually, just in terms of a squad option at the very least. They've got a centre-back, Abdullah Fai, who will probably compete with him for minutes, potentially Vaisanen. They've put Oscar Janssen in, but I think, in goal, they've got a few options in goal, to be fair, that, I do like their goalkeeper. I think he's a decent player, actually, on his day, Steve. So, my only worry with them in terms of maybe, Linda, sorry, I think he's a good goalkeeper. So they've got 3 good goalkeepers, really, and Abrahamson, obviously, is a veteran now. Linda and Oscar Janssen is a veteran. Looking through the team, they have got good options. They've got some young talent like Pontus Darbo, who I like. But they've got some players coming to the end of their careers, maybe in terms of like Mikael Rygaard now is 34. Another one who maybe is becoming a bit of a veteran. Launi's 32, although he grabbed 2 goals today and he looked really good, to be fair to him. Kind of almost like a Salah type, the way he played today. A lot will be expected of Serdan Hrstić. He's been quite prolific in pre-season. I'm not massively convinced by him, but we'll see. And then, of course, up front, Steve, the one that everyone's looking at is Zidane Inusa, 22-year-old. I think there's going to be massive things expected of him this season, and huge interest from foreign teams, really teams in Europe who want to sign him. I'm just a bit concerned about Jens Gustafsson, and is it the right fit for Häcken? I think he's a bit more of a conservative manager in this just might be my own perception, really. I don't have any potential, massive evidence or stats to back up in that sense. But I just always think of him as a bit more of a conservative manager compared to how I always think of Häcken, as like an all-out attack, like all guns blazing kind of side. And I did see sort of glimpses of that. Maybe they're looking to be a bit more solid now. But I did see even glimpses of it in the game against BP today, where they're just a little bit more conservative. So that is a bit of a worry for me. But they've romped through the Swedish Cup. They've done well again, as they always do in that competition. And I think they can definitely be top 5.
I was doing a fair bit of research into Häcken today because they were involved in the opening day. Jens Gustafsson really interests me here. Do you know how old he is, Jonathan? And do you know how many games he's actually managed?
Well, he's been around the block in terms of games. I mean, he's been in several different countries, right? I think he's been in Croatia. I think he's been in Saudi. He's been around the block for Norrköping. Very experienced manager.
Yeah.
You tell you. I don't know how old he is though.
You wouldn't believe this. So he's 422 games he's managed, but he's only 46, which shocked me.
Wow,
When I thought he was in his 50s. I really did.
that is quite young.
I tell you, I agree with you. When I saw this manager, I'm like, hold on a minute. This is not quite the gung ho type that BK or Häcken have had, or the proactive manager. But I watched the game today, or the second half of it, and what I did like is when they went 1-0 up, he went looking for the second goal. Now that may have been the players, like we know, Layuni loves to get on the score sheet, doesn't he, and pad his stats. But I liked that rather than get a goal, sit on it. Maybe his time in other countries has done him some good, because that Norrköping version of him was a little bit more robust, wasn't it? But time will tell how Häcken go on. You mentioned in Nusa there, he is part of the Y-Scout blog that's just been released. Do check it out. 5 breakthrough talents in the Itinerary and Allsvenskan this season. We think going to have breakthrough seasons with our partners Y-Scout. So do check out that blog. BK Häcken, the media prediction for them in general, sort of 4th place here. I've seen a lot of them in 4th and 5th, and you've got them there as well. It looks like they could be a chance to make the medal spots. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've got anything else to add about Häcken here. Maybe a young talent that could be worth keeping an eye
on. 2 words: Pontus Darbo.
Yes, Pontus Darbo. There's always someone, isn't there? They're a bit like, I mean, you mentioned Hammarby there. They're always the sort of team who will find someone to come through the ranks. Okay, rounding up the top 6 then. I've got to be honest, at the back end of last season, I thought we might be talking about this team as a potential even title challenger. But in 6th place, Jonathan, I'm a little bit disappointed actually here in a way. I thought they might be a bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, where Häcken finished 8th last season, and we've got them in 5th. Media have got them 4th. This team finished 3rd last season. Media's got them in 6th, and I've got them in 6th. So, yeah, I've gone for IFK. I think that it could go either way with the IFK. I think so. I mean, it tells you everything that you need to know, Steve. That when it's the opening day of the season, and the club sacks their sporting director before the first game. So shock announcement literally this morning that Thomas Berntsen has departed the club, and that's never a good sign, is it? Really? I mean, you spent the entire. I mean, you've got the longest transfer window in probably the world, and you wait till it ends, and literally, then you sack him on the day the season starts. I think that if there was ever a dictionary definition of turmoil, that would probably be it. There's actually I think there's an internal sort of podcast or something they're doing tomorrow with the new people who are in charge. I think someone called Jeremy Steele, who's been involved with analytics and things like that. I don't know too much about the people who are coming in necessarily, but there's been a big announcement saying essentially they're going to sort of answer questions for the fans who are extremely disgruntled. This is a team that's funny because they're almost like the IFK of Stockholm, really, in a way, and just in the sense of like the turmoil. There's always like rumblings. No matter what happens, there's always just sort of like it's like a drama, soap opera type club in a way. So at the moment, I think that that it's quite well documented. The finances at IFK are a bit of a worry, and I think they've maybe cut above their cloth a little bit in terms of spending and things like that, and payments they've made over in the past. They tend to sort of bring in big players, on big money, but sometimes it doesn't work out. They've had a lot of players. If you go through their transfer, Steve, they've had a lot of players that they've sort of brought in, and it's just not worked out on big money. Big names and things like that. Even Guidetti, I think he's done okay, all things considered. But even him, you could look at and say, has he really sort of paid his dues in terms of how much money he's probably on there? And I can think of others like the likes of Jimmy Durmaz in the past, and others who've been on big wage and maybe not performed to the levels that they want. The manager, he came in last season, didn't he, Steve? And he really sort of tightened up that defence and went back to almost all your core traditions of the last sort of 10 years. Really solid sort of team. Henningberg lost his job, and there was problems last season, and he did, to be fair to him, really really well to come in and finish where they finished. But I just think that there are sort of alarm bells with, as we just mentioned there, the squad as it is, what's going on with them in that sense. And that does worry me slightly, Stephen. In that sense, the squad's not bad. When you look at it, there has been signings, to be fair, but is it enough to sort of really challenge, like say, the top three? I'm not entirely sure. They've still got good players like Seletros, Tichosen. Isherwood is a decent player, at this level. But I'm just slightly concerned about the strength and depth of the squad, and also, Steve, the fact that I'm not entirely sure that not necessarily cost cutting, but I'm not sure that if they're still going to maybe have to cut the cloth accordingly in terms of the way they approach transfers. And I think there is something going on behind the scenes internally about how they do things, and that is what makes me worry about how they'll perform. Not everyone's on the same page. Do you know what I mean, Steve?
That is a worry. Like, off the field, they don't seem to be that great at the moment. I mean, who on earth does sack the sporting director right on the start of the season? That doesn't make sense. One thing they did get right last season was appointing the manager, though, Mikael Thomason. He's a perfect fit for IFK. He's kind of brought back the days of solid defences being boring. I can guarantee, I'm not going to say guarantee, but I think there's a good chance that they will overachieve their metrics, if you know what I mean. He's the sort of manager that does that with the team that he has. It's the system that he uses, 3 at the back sort of thing, wing back system. They'll lack goals, but they might not need that many goals because they will keep a lot of clean sheets. When they win matches, they'll win quite a lot of matches to 0. So I think if they back him properly and end up with a squad that he wants, then I think they can do quite well. But it might take a while maybe to get to that sort of position. I mean, who are going to be the key men for IFK this season if they're going to go well? Immediately, I'm thinking goalkeeper and defense.
Yeah, I think you touched on it quite well there. He's done a fantastic job, to be fair to him, and I think that's the one saving grace, really. If there's an internal power struggle, you probably would lean towards getting rid of your sporting director rather than your manager in this situation, just because Thomason did so well. But I don't know if that is literally the case. It's a bit up in the air. In terms of sort of players that you would expect to be key, Steve, I think Guidetti is still, despite his advancing years, I think he's still got a goal in him. He's still a good player, really, at this level. It's just can he stay fit, really? He's just always had sort of injury problems since he's been in his 30s that he hasn't really been able to overcome. I'm slightly worried, Steve, in the sense of players they've lost. I think that although Axel Björnstrom wasn't a top class, maybe name, I think he was quite a solid campaigner. He's gone to Värnamo. I'm not saying he's going to be a huge loss, but one player I think they definitely will miss, Steve, is Janos Pitas, their top scorer last year, more or less. The Cypriot, he's gone to Bulgaria, in fact, CSKA Sofia for 1.2 million. They've replaced him with, sorry, Steve, they've replaced him with another Cypriot, funnily enough. Andronikos Kakoulis has come in from Omonia Nicosia, so maybe it's sort of 1 in, 1 out. They've paid $1 million for him, so I don't know a huge amount about him in terms of his track record, but I guess they'll expect him to get in some goals. The other player that I think they'll miss, Steve, is, although he's not always advancing in the years, is Alexander Milosevic. I've always really liked him, the centre-back. I think he's always been a good leader at the back there, and I think that is a bit of a problem. They have brought in, they have got replacements for him. I think that the back 3 at least, probably, Steve, will probably be, I think, Giannopoulos, maybe Benkovic, and Isherwood, and obviously they'll play that kind of wing back system. I expect them to be in a sort of a 3-4-3/3-5-2, depending on how they want to shape up. They've got a young talent that I think could be one to look out for, Steve, whose name is Redkin. He could be an interesting one. Andreas Redkin from the academy, 18-year-old, and he's got some minutes in pre-season and look pretty solid. They've got a midfielder called Aaron Songvai from Hungary. They've paid 500,000 euros for, and he looks like a talent. Kasper Carlsen as well, and Johan Hover from Groningen, 800,000 euros as well. So they've got some reinforcements, but they haven't splashed huge amounts of cash. 2.83 million total they've spent. So yeah.
Do you know what? I think they might do. They could be a pleasant surprise. I really do rate the manager. I don't like that they're in Europe, but I'd expect them to get knocked out fairly quickly of Conference League qualifying. I don't see them making the group stage of that. But you never know. They might get on a run. That would be a bad impact on the season. Pitas. I mean, is that a concern almost? I mean, why would he go to CSKA Sofia? Does that suggest that the Bulgarian league is suddenly stronger? I mean, Luda Gerrits are the only really significant team in that nation. That's a strange one. Maybe the manager didn't want him. Don't know what the story is there. But I mean, we know what we're going to get with them. IFK, they could go well. But you predicted them here in 6th place. They were 3rd last season, of course. It was a strong top 6 that you predicted here: Malmö, Hammarby, Djurgården, Elfsborg, BK, Häcken, and IFK. I mean, that's a pretty strong top 6. So we now go outside that mark, and one of our old favourites here on the Nordic Football Podcast, and one of my favourite managers in the game.
Yeah, I've gone for Mjällby, Steve. They're my prediction to finish in that 7th spot. I actually do think they could finish above IFK and maybe Häcken, like they did last season, to be fair, finishing above Häcken. They finished 5th last season, Mjällby. And Steve, it's probably one of my most sort of proud predictions, I think. I did back them last season to finish 6th. And the media have predicted them 8th. And I did say last season that I think they can finish above some of the bigger teams in this league. And they actually went even one better in the end. A monumental season, really. And I think my direct quote, Steve, was, if Värnamo can finish that high, why can't Mjällby? And they went and proved me wrong. So massive shout out to our man, Anders Torstensson. Of course, I know he's had some personal issues as well last season, and it's good to see that he'll still be around. Mjällby are that sort of side, Steve, where they're almost a bit like a good loaf of bread. They're like a nice Warburton's in the morning. They're like a nice cup of tea when you boil the kettle in the morning and you just sit down and drink it. They're like putting on warm slippers, Steve. You can rely on Mjällby. You can rely on the Torstensson team. They're bread and butter. They're not going to be anything spectacular, but you can rely on them. They will get the job done. I will go as far as to predict they'll beat Malmö away, or at least they'll beat one of the big boys away. You can always guarantee that they'll give a few teams a bloody nose away from home. Home record is always maybe a bit up and down, but playing by the beach there in that stadium, they're always solid defensively. That could be challenging this year because they have lost a few players, but they've always got a good game plan, Steve. Set pieces and things like that, second balls, they'll fight for them, and they'll always be competitive. They're not the sort of team that will sort of gets destroyed. They won't, let their heads go down. They're dogs of war type team. And I think that will continue, Steve, this season. I think there's quite a lot of teams, obviously in part 2, we'll talk about a few of them, that, when I say that, I don't mean it in a negative way that they're bread and butter, because there's quite a few teams in this league that are very hard to predict in a way, and you can't really hang your hat on them. I think at Torstensson, Mjällby side, you can hang your hat on and say 9 times out of 10, they'll at least give it 100%. And, if they do lose, it won't be for want of trying.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the main reasons they do well, they're a great underdog. Great team to bet on as a big underdog. Not so good as a favourite sometimes. Is the system 3 at the back again? We're going to talk about some players soon, but do you think it's fair to say, Jonathan, that, we've always kind of talked about them overachieving maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, but did they have perhaps better quality players than we give them credit for? They seem to actually have, under the radar, a decent transfer system here. They lose players, but they seem to bring in some really good replacements. So, yet again, on paper, some might look at them and think, bottom half easily. Actually, is there better quality here than a lot of people out there would expect?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, and I think you're spot on, to be honest. And I think their sporting director deserves more credit. I think because they're quite a small club reputationally, they don't get maybe the credit they deserve, both for players and people behind the scenes, and even Torstensson, to be fair. If you think about it, other managers have had links to big jobs off the back of achievements that are similar to what Torstensson's done. We just talked about Hammarby and the fact that obviously their manager got the job off the back of how well he did at Värnamo. Why is Torstensson maybe not particularly linked with the big 3, for example? When that Djurgården job came available, maybe he should be one they look at potentially. But I know that we did have him on the pod a few years ago, and he did talk about how he likes his golf. He does like that area. He does like the region. Maybe it's maybe he's not that interested himself. And I know he's like we mentioned, he's had his issues in the last year. And I'll keep fighting, my friend, as we say. And it's good to see that he's still around to manage this good team. But I think you're right. The sporting director has done a good job, and I remember last season there was a bit of a brouhaha with an agent. I think it was when they sold Colin Russell to Malmö, and I think the Mjällby sporting director came out and said, "I'll never deal with this agency again," or something like that. And he has got a bit of an eye for a player, to be fair, Steve. And if you look at the ins and outs this season, there's a few that I think they will miss, but there's also a few that I think that could come in and do quite well. So if we start with the players they've lost in that sense, Yanni is someone I thought he would have a breakout year last year. It didn't quite go that way, but I do think that's a good signing for IFK, who we'll come on to. Arvid Brawson they lost as well, and they lost Wikström, who we talked about, to Elfsborg, and I think they're three good players. From the point of view of the ins and outs, Steve, if we come to players that Malmö have recruited, they brought in some names that, to be fair, you might know a bit more about some of these players. The likes of Tony Meetonen, centre-back from Odd. Two players from Odd. They've poached Odd, Steve. One of them, and I know you mentioned the best name in the league being Rap, but I think Bork Bang Kittelsen, who's a 19-year-old right winger from Odd as well, for €100,000. He might be one that might be a rival contender for your best name there. I don't know too much about him. I'm sure you'll tell me in a second. They put in Calvin Kabuyi from Sandvikens. They paid €200,000 for him. And the other one that I think could potentially be decent is where is he now? Can't quite see him. Axel Noren on a free transfer from GAIS. I think he's potentially, could be defensively fairly solid. But yeah, all in all, I think that they've lost a few, like I've just said there. They've brought in a few. They've recruited generally quite well over the years, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think they'll keep that sort of solid mindset and mind frame that should stand them in good stead to have a good top half finish.
In the Allsvenskan fantasy game, Bjorn Bang Kittelsen is just literally known as Bang. Simply put, €5.5 million player. I actually think this is a good signing for €100,000. He showed some decent things whilst at Odd in a really poor Odd team, it must be said. They brought in Tony Meetonen from the same club, nearly €500,000. It's a typical profile of a Mjällby centre-back. Big, strong, physical. What they do, I really like their recruitment and signings. They have a Pacific system now. It's like 3-5-2 roughly. It can change a bit. And everyone knows their role, don't they? Up front, there's always someone physical, whether it be Bergstrom. On his day, you wouldn't want to be defending him, would you? You get stuck into everything. They're a good team. I think they're underrated. I really do. And I really like that you've got them high again. But I've got to ask you about one player who is the most owned in Allsvenskan fantasy, and that is Elliot Stroud. A massive 52.5% of people do own him in the game. I actually don't own him at the moment, but should I be owning him?
Yeah, I don't own him either as well, Steve. So maybe we might have both missed the trick on this one, and maybe we'll be scrambling around to fill our fantasy teams in the next few weeks. For those of you who are playing the fantasy, we'll drop the code at the halfway point, so stay tuned if you haven't already entered. It's an interesting one, Steve, because I'm surprised he's still there. There was quite a few bids for him in the winter. I think that, as far as I'm aware, there was a club in Poland made quite a strong bid for him. Mulder bid for him, Steve, and he didn't go. And Oiko, I think, as well, were strongly linked with him. And I think Malmö as well. So, I think he's someone that I could definitely see going to like either a top club in Sweden, maybe DIF or a Malmö. Or I could see him going to one of those sort of like championship clubs that have been linked with him. The sporting director, Hasse Larsson, by the way, is the one who, we should be giving the praise for the recruitment side of it. He said, literally, we are not selling him now. Simple as that. I think the bid from Mulder was about 16 million Swedish krona, which is about, roughly just over £1 million. So I think the only thing from a fantasy point of view, Steve, it does seem like he might be on pens. So he might be taking a few penalties there. And obviously he's got a good reputation from last season. He scored a lot, but his price has gone up quite considerably. I think he's now 7 million, which to me is a bit rich for my blood until I see what Mjällby look like, because defensively, I know they're good, but they still have a few question marks in my mind in terms of just how good, because they've basically got more or less almost an entire new backline, Steve. I expect the backline to probably look like Noren, who we talked about from GAIS. I think Tornqvist is still there, of course. I think Killerich probably being there, and he actually popped up with a few goals in pre-season. And Tom Pettersson. and then they'll probably have Stroud and Johansson on the wing back roles. With your man Kittelson, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Steve, they've paid a decent amount of money for him in terms of 100,000 euros. It's not much, is it? I guess if he's nicknamed Bang, then they've definitely got some bang for their buck.
Yeah, I think they have. Do you know what? I really love the. I think there's just so much straight talking and no nonsense around the people in charge at this club, whether it's the manager or the sporting director. I mean, I think that'd be brilliant. I would love to have an interview with either of them. With Anders Torstensson, I think it's great to have him still at the club. One of these days, I'd love to have 2 or 3. I'd love to have 18 holes of golf with him, but I can imagine a bit of sort of YouTube documentary content of Steve Wyss versus Anders Torstensson 9-hole challenge or something, followed by an interview. That'd be brilliant. That would be one of my real things to look forward to. But I mean, you predict them 7th here. I'm loving that. And again, I think they can really bloody a few no's, as I like to coin the phrase these days, and cause some problems.
Best of luck to our friend Anders Torstensson, of course. I did actually text him a few days ago, asked him who he predicted to win the league. I won't tell you exactly who he said because I don't want to spoiler alert, managers, it's confidential, but he seemed in good spirits. And for those listeners who in terms of what Meat Man Soccer was just saying there, if you could see the smart, big, I can see the screen here. And when he started talking about like the no-nonsense sporting director and manager, you can just see the biggest smile on his face. Like he's so happy, like... that is a picture. You got a massive grin on your face.
I'm like a Cheshire cat, aren't I? Yeah. Right now,
you really Mjällby is right up your street, like a proper no nonsense team.
Absolutely. Wishing them well. You predicted them 7th, and that is where the media are actually good to see the media giving them a bit more respect than normal. I think finally they've earned that respect. And yes, this might be released on video if I can get the editing right. So if it is, then you'll see that. And you'll also see behind me a scarf, which Jonathan kindly bought for me on his trip to Sweden last year. And it is the scarf of a team that I do hold quite dearly to my heart in Sweden. I certainly think they've got the number one pre-game anthem. And now a prediction in the top half of the table from you, Jonathan. It might be possibly the first time in a few years that this is the case. But you have gone with IFK Göteborg as 8th place to round off part 1 of our season preview.
Yeah, and it's quite funny, really, how I was thinking about this earlier and how I lived in Gothenburg for a period of time, and yet you are the biggest fan on this podcast of them. It's quite funny, really, how that's panned out. But yes, you've got the scarf in the background. I can see it there. It looks very nice. I remember my trip last year. And this is a team that obviously was literally, I think, goal difference away from, I think it was even goal scored away from going into the relegation playoff last season. A terrible season, Steve. And, as fate had it in the end, I don't know if I'm breaching confidences here, but for those regular listeners, they might have already heard a couple of things that we've said on this podcast in the past. But in terms of like the twists of fate that happen in the world, Steve, I mean, we're a couple of goals potentially away from this podcast not existing, mate. And you watching me as the working in the backroom team at IFK Göteborg, the way things went last season, it was wafer thin in terms of that. But that's maybe a story for another day. I don't know how much I can say on that. But yes, I did do my final project with IFK Göteborg. I did have conversations with the previous board about potentially a role at the club. And the internal power struggle, lo and behold, Steve, at the end of that season, when the fans lifted that banner saying, get rid of the CEO, get rid of the sporting director, and get rid of everyone else, and they all left the club, my dreams were in tatters, Steve. And so here I am on this podcast with you, and not IFK getting ready for the opening game of the season, which might be a good thing, to be fair, because I really don't want a big banner saying Fadugba out in Gothenburg anytime soon with my name on it. I think that would be quite an interesting experience. But yeah, my team that I've got in the 8th place is IFK Göteborg, finished 13th last season. The media have got them in 8th as well. So me and Helen, we've got a few similarities here, actually. A few few similar predictions. So she's welcome to give me a shout and talk about it. But yeah, I think that Steve, I've been very encouraged with what I've seen in pre-season in terms of the results they've had. I have a bit of a theory here, Steve, that I think they've got a bit of a secret weapon. And his name is Hakeem Araba, Steve, who I'm going to make an attempt. I'm going to say it right now on this show. I'm going to make an attempt to try and get him on the podcast. Now, he is the fitness coach, Steve, of IFK Göteborg, and he came in, and there's a picture of him that they posted, and he's absolutely ripped. It's like gladiators. He's like every single muscle chiseled. And he came in as their fitness coach, Steve, and I think there was an article I saw where it said, "I will run this team into the ground," or something like that, paraphrasing. And lo and behold, Steve, in pre-season, there was a first training session he did. They posted after he did some mad run or something, like Bielsa style pre-season, where they're running all over the place, Steve. And after it, they put a little clip on social media, and it was half the squad was literally about to puke. There were people it looked like a war zone. People are lying on the floor, arms everywhere, absolutely exhausted, Steve. And I think that this is maybe the new era in terms of they're really looking to up their fitness and really looking to shape up, to be honest. And in terms of pre-season, it seems to have had a bit of an effect. There's been a lot of changes, a lot of ins and outs as well, on and off the pitch, as I've just mentioned there. Huge changes in the backroom staff, Steve, huge turmoil. But maybe the season could be the year that they start to finally climb out of this big pit that they're in. And I'm not saying that it's going to definitely all go right, but a couple of the results in the Swedish Cup, like we saw, beating Djurgården away and smashing for Hammarby 4-0, just offer me a bit of encouragement that this could be a slightly better year for Blåvitt.
No, that's good to hear. This can't continue where IFK Göteborg are nearly getting relegated every year. There's been a couple of close calls now. So it would be a welcome return to mid-table. Stefan Billborn is in charge, and we didn't see typical Stefan Billborn sort of results last season when he came in. There was a lack of goals, possibly due to poor finishing, but do you think we're going to see kind of the more traditional Billborn wild games, 3-2s, 4-3s, entertaining football? Is that, possibly from what we've seen, the cup results have been very encouraging, haven't they, for sure? And what players do you think can help propel IFK this season into that top half?
Yeah, well, we did see 1-4-3, as I just mentioned there, and so I think you can potentially look to maybe get a few more. I think they will be very attacking. If they can get that fitness right, that's why I think that this signing of Araba in the backroom staff is quite important, because he seems like a no-nonsense kind of guy, mate. I know you're a bit of a gym man these days, Steve. I think you go around with him and you'll be in shape in no time. He looks like real no-nonsense in terms of some of the clips they've put on social media and stories about him. Obviously, former player as well. I think that in terms of what you're asking, I think there will be goals. I think that they will still stick to their principles from that point of view. But I also think that they'll look to try and be defensively a bit more solid. If you look at some of the signings, Steve, like I said, I like the signing of Mjällby. I think he's still a good age. Former Everton man. Obviously, he's been around the block now, hasn't he? Because he played for BK Häcken. And now he's obviously moved back to Gothenburg, from Mjällby. And I still think there's a real player in here somewhere. So you're still young. I said last year that I thought he'd be a breakout. I think I've had him in 10 to watch before. I can't remember. But at 440,000 euros, I think that he can add a bit of steel to the midfield and also a bit of creativity and guile. Max Fenger, I think he's looked okay, signing from Odense up front. Sebastian Clemenson's come in from Hammarby. That's their biggest signing, 620,000 euros. A couple of academy lads, Noah Tolf has come in, and I think he will get quite a bit of game time, to be fair. A few others have come back in. The big sale, Steve, was Lars Schellerup, who I thought started to look really good at the back end of last season. He's been sold to Italy for 3.6 million, which is a massive amount of money. I know there's a big emphasis behind the scenes at the club to try and start making a bit more money in terms of transfer sales. Obviously, after Yalkuye as well, he went to Brighton last year, so that's a good bit of extra cash in the coffers. That's probably about, I think, 30% of their budget or so made in one transfer, maybe 40% or so, 25%. They've lost a few players in the likes of Oscar Wendt retired, the veteran left back. Emil Salamonson also retired, 39 and 35 respectively. So there's natural regeneration of the squad. They've lost a lot of players, Steve. Oscar Pettersson's left. Gustav Norling's left. Sebastian Olsen's also gone to Degerfors. Abundant Salau's gone on loan. Paulos Abraham, obviously, he's returned now and gone to Hammarby, as we mentioned. So there's a lot of departures, and this is a slightly newer looking squad about them and slightly newer looking team. Tobias Heinz has come in as well. He's former Beko Häcken, and he's come from Bulgaria as well, CFK Sofia. Never really quite maybe did it abroad, has he? And he's come back. So yeah, there's a lot of rotation in this squad. I think it's a really whole new team, and I think the squad's got the team's got a bit of freshness about it. That I think that maybe there could be some improvements.
Yeah, it sounds promising. This fitness coach sounds like a mix between Marcelo Bielsa and Felix Magath. Pre-season Magath, of course, was well known for his brutal regimes, wasn't he? But you've got to get him in shape, haven't you? And as I know all too well myself these days, as you've got to crack on, and hopefully we'll see the results on the field for IFK. You're predicting them 8th, and that rounds up the top half of your predictions. Malmö in 1st, Hammarby 2nd, Djurgården 3rd, Elfsborg 4th, BK Häcken in 5th, IFK in 6th, Mjällby 7th, and then IFK Göteborg in 8th place. Do join us after the break. We'll be talking about the bottom half of the Allsvenskan season predictions from Jonathan. So catch us after this. Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast, Allsvenskan 2025 season preview. Thank you very much for listening so far. Do leave us a review on your podcast platform or a comment on YouTube if you're watching in that way. Who do you think is going to do well or badly in Allsvenskan this season? And we mentioned it in the first half there, Allsvenskan Fantasy. You can join our league. The code to join is 20C901. So that is 20C901. And you can join the Nordic Football Podcast League. There's some incredibly good fantasy experts in that league down the years. And always a healthy battle between me and you in Allsvenskan. You've done well the last couple of seasons, Jonathan. In fact, I was very impressed with your performance last season. Interesting that you actually captained Busanello in week 1. That's a player that I never have him, and he always does me in. But you definitely have a way of going outside the box in this fantasy. So I'll be keeping my eye on your team.
Well, I'm not sure about healthy competition last year. I couldn't really see you anywhere to be seen in the top 10, which is where I finished in the Nordic Football Podcast League. I even beat Sam Hart, which was probably my biggest achievement to date. So very happy with my performance last year, top 10 in the league. The winner was, of course, Albin Johansson. He is the man to beat this season, the Maggie. And we've always got Robert Uninger is always up and about there, and a few others that regularly play the league. But I remember, I think, Steve, you were down in about 30th, 40th place last season. So let's see what happens this year. No, I was quite happy with the captain of Busanello, but I got a few wrong this week. I think that I jumped on the bandwagon with Herstich, for example. And I'm not convinced by him, so we'll see what he does at Häcken. Sigurdsson let me down as well a little bit.
I only dropped, I think, 100 positions in the overall ranking last season. My best ever finish was 2022. Overall, 1,163. So I need to get back to those heights. That was just everything went my way that season.
Yeah, I remember
everything went my way.
Yeah,
I think I beat you by 7
those
points.
Those are long gone now. Last 2 seasons.
I could be back. But what doesn't suit me as much at Allsvenskan Fantasy because there's not many double game weeks. And I do like my double game weeks, Jonathan. There's none until round 10. So I always hope for a lot of postponements for the weather or something. It never seems to happen enough. But if the doubles come...
That's one thing about Itinerary, isn't it? There's always double game weeks that I don't like.
I love double game weeks.
There's one next week, right, in the Itinerary?
Yeah, there's loads. There's loads in Itinerary. It's like Premier League. There's quite a lot of double game. I love double game weeks. I think you can get a massive edge in them. But I know a lot don't like them either. Yeah, the Swedish, there's not many of them there, but do join that league. Anyway, we're here to keep discussing the season preview. You've done your top 8. We're now into the bottom half. And in 9th place, again, at the moment, you relatively have been in line with a lot of the media prediction this season, which is interesting. But 9th place, tell us who you have this season.
Yeah, it's quite weird actually, because 8th, 9th, and 10th, I've got the exact same as Helen. So maybe we need to go and have a few cocktails and discuss it. But
or maybe you have already been.
No comment. But no, I think I just noticed that, to be fair. I didn't actually really realize that when I was doing the predictions at the time. But yeah, I've gone for basically the same as the media in this sense, and I've gone for Norrköping. Finished last season in 11th. Obviously, media was predicted the 9th, and I'm going 9th as well. Up and down side Norrköping, a bit like a mini IFK. Massive turmoil behind the scenes, but I think they've got an interesting manager that I'm going to put a little bit of faith in this season. So it could be completely wrong. But basically, Steve, they have got what you would describe as the Fabian Hürzeler of Allsvenskan, because they have hired a manager in Martin Falk, who's 29 years old, Steve, born in 1995. Even you're not that young. I don't think.
What?
I think even you.
How old?
Born in 1995.
29 years old, and he's the head coach of an Allsvenskan club.
Unbelievable, right?
That is absolutely incredible. Wow.
I mean, when he was born, Steve, Blackburn were the champions at that time. So
I remember
he was just, so that sums it all up at the end of the day. Even you were a spring chicken back then, which is amazing. But he's the former Malmö assistant manager, Steve. So he's got a good, it's a bit like Arteta, isn't it? He's had a bit of a good breeding ground, learning from, a great in Rydström potentially. And of course, he's been given the role, Steve. And it's a bit of a weird one because Norrköping are quite a traditional club, and it's something like IFK Göteborg as well, that the power struggle there that maybe we'll talk about in future weeks. But there's a big power struggle within the club, I think, between like the old guard and things like that. And Norrköping are a bit similar in that sense. And there's massive turmoil behind the scenes. They've sacked like the club director, like loads of people have left behind the scenes. Maybe they've just decided to go, right, let's go full youth, you know what I mean? And let's just go all out for it. And giving this guy the role. Now, he's come in and he's done okay, to be fair, in pre-season. The squad is still, it's not amazing. That's why I think that they'll be just lower mid-table. But they do have a few signings that could be, ones to watch, or not necessarily signings, but just players in their squad that I think maybe this new young manager can get a little bit more out of. Steve, in terms of the incomings, obviously Alexander Fransson is a bit of a veteran now, 30 years old. Odd have been raided, haven't they, really, by Allsvenskan? They've got a young Icelandic player, which is always the way at Norrköping. They must have some sort of link there with someone in Iceland. But Jonathan Gudni Arnesen, of 18-year-old right winger, Steve, who can forget, players that they've had from Iceland in the past that have done really well for the club. Sebastian Jorgensen's coming from Malmö on loan. I think that's a good probably move for him as well, just to get some more game time. But players out, they've lost a couple, but I don't think it's massive problems, panic stations really, if I'm being honest. Some of the players they've lost. Siwan Kambo has gone. Kazani has gone, which I think is a shame. Obviously, remember he had such a turbulent time with his health. He's been released and he's 29 now, so we wish him all the best, Kazani, because his comeback was one of the great stories, wasn't it, from the issues he had. As I say, Siwan Kambo's gone, Shabani's gone. A few others have gone, Steve. Yerv have signed one of their players, which is interesting. Hammarby have signed Jakob Ortmark, which could be a potential loss. And I think Vito Hammershøi Mistrati, he was always quite up and down, wasn't he? And I think that, our good friend Henry Nico had him as an interview guest once. But he's gone to Denmark, and also a few others, Leo Jonsson and Dino Salihovic, have gone. He's gone to Valencia B, which is an interesting move. So there is a bit of regeneration in this squad, Steve, but I don't know. I just think this manager's a bit of a wild card, and I think I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Very, very interesting. I mean, I'm just looking now through Transfermarkt. In 5 official games, he's used 5 different formations, which, I mean, that is the definition of a wild card. 4 very strong wins, and then they lost to Häcken in the semi-finals of the Swedish Cup. So this is, I mean, I'm actually quite pleased about this because Norrköping was starting to fall into, honestly, a team that I was starting to not really care about. Like much of a muchness every single season now, sort of finishing in the same positions. I couldn't really feel any identity about them. Maybe that's why they've done it. Maybe they felt that they needed to do something like this. So you've got them in ninth position. Very, very interesting. This 29-year-old manager in charge of the club. In 10th place, you have gone with GAIS, who finished brilliantly 6th last season. A fantastic home record, the 5th best home record in the league. How can they be so good at home? And IFK had the 3rd worst home record. They play at the same damn venue, for goodness sake. But GAIS did very well last season. Bit of talk going around that they might suffer sort of second season syndrome, a bit like what Fredrikstad are in Norway. So you've got them dropping down the table a bit, but they, by the looks of it, you're thinking a solid mid-table outfit?
Yeah, I think, guys, when you look at it from a transfers point of view, Steve, they're a bit kind of not too much has actually happened. In terms of the ins and outs anyway. I mean, certainly the ins, they've been quite quiet, really. Nothing major. A few outs. So, we can see how it goes on from that point of view. But, yeah, I think that they had such a good season last season, didn't they? Finishing above IFK, for example, which is a massive thing for their fans. Really, that's something they really wanted to do. And, of course, from that point of view, Steve, as well, they finished... they ended up becoming the number one club in Gothenburg, because they also finished above BK Häcken. So, finished 6th. I think this year they'll have a bit of a dip. The novelty factor is not quite there. So I think that's something that will probably, second season syndrome, isn't it? How will they react? But the one thing I can say about GAIS, Steve, is that they're very, they're a proud club, aren't they? They've got a good track record at this level. And you kind of sometimes think to yourself that they really do deserve to be at this level. So it was really good to see them kind of bounce back. And there's some really famous wins, didn't they, in the derbies, and also other teams they beat. I think I remember them beating IFK, for example, and big clubs that they beat. The big departure probably is Alexander Armstrong, who's gone to Magdeburg. He's a player that I thought he was quite hit and miss, but he did crack on some form last season and managed to get himself a decent move there, to be fair. So he's 25, and I think I'm not quite sure if they've really properly replaced him. They've brought in Ibrahim Diabate from Västerås, who obviously played at this level last season, to be fair, he did look good in little spells, brief spells. But I think there'll be a lot of emphasis on the forwards to kind of chip in with goals, which I'm not sure how many goals they have on that side. In terms of transfer, Steve, the biggest money they spent is 60k. Which is peanuts, really, isn't it? I mean, you spend that on a weekend in Harrogate, I think, these days. So I built an Oscar Agren from Braga, and they've brought in Matteo de Brien from Ottawa, a left back and a centre back for 60k each. The rest are free transfers. Diabate. They've got a couple of other undisclosed fees, so I don't know if they could be more. Haroon Ibrahim's come in from Molde. So, I don't know a huge amount about some of these players, to be fair. A couple of lower division players like from Norby and Oscar Ham. So, I think I'm not too sure about the squad and if it can maintain the levels of 6.
What staggered me last season, you were out in Gothenburg for the opening round and they got beat 4-0 by Brommapojkarna at home. And you said, if they play like that, they're going to finish bottom of the table. It was a remarkable turnaround. I think they only drew one of their first 19 games. And I've always said before, lack of draws is not always the worst thing in football, as long as you're winning enough games. And that's what happened with them. Half of their defeats were by more than a 2-goal margin. So I think they were, on a bad day, they were pretty bad. But they obviously got enough wins. They seemed quite together as a unit. Individuals didn't really stand out too much, but I suppose Gustav Lundgren is the player that makes a lot tick for them in the midfield areas. Would he be the one to look out for? I was looking at the squad, and it's difficult to pick out individuals. They're more of a team. Yeah,
it's crazy when you think about it. Actually, back to that game, I remember that day just thinking, they got no chance. And even I think a manager told me after the game that I spoke to during my trip there, and he was like, they're toast. Like, they haven't got hope of staying up. And ironically, they finished one of the top teams in the league, so it's crazy. And I think that's a testament to their manager, Steve. I think Fredrik Holmberg is a very highly rated manager. And as I've said before, I think last season I said to you, when I'm not sure about a team, I went with defence. And I said last season, if there was two teams and there was a toss-up, I'd go with the stronger defence. I think this season, Steve, it's when I'm not sure about it, I go with a manager. And I think there's some good managers at this level now. I think there's some really exciting young managers. 29 is no way is incredible, but Holmberg is, everyone you talk to about him, players that he's worked with and things like that, they think he's top. Apparently, really good manager. So I feel like he will get a tune out of this team. They might be a team, Steve, similar to what you just said there. I think they might even be a team that starts the season getting battered a few times. They lost to Norrköping 3-0 in pre-season in the Swedish Cup, for example, at home. So, they might be a team that takes a few beatings, needs to sort of sort themselves out. I mean, if you look at this team that lost to Norrköping at 3-0, there's not much real players you'd hang your hat on, if I'm being honest. Quite a few of the players are new or not really done it at this level. They've still got Wangberg, of course, who's a veteran. He's a good experience, isn't he? He's 32 years old now. They've got one or two others, but some of the new signings that I don't know, like I said, I don't know much about. Maybe they're going to need some time to settle in. But I think the one thing with Holmberg, and he did it last season, it's like he'll figure it out, I think. So I would trust him to sort of figure it out. They are quite volatile fans. They do have some demands, their fans. They do want wins and things like that. But the squad doesn't look too bad, but I don't see a huge amount of quality. And like you said there, I think Lundgren's going to be a big player for them.
Yeah, it's asking a lot for them to be top half again, isn't it? If we're being honest. That would be probably pushing the boundaries a bit too much. You've got them in 10th place.
One other player, Steve, that I'll just quickly mention, I think Kevin Holman, a signing from Elfsborg, potentially could. He's someone who I think that I think he could be a good player, to be fair. I think he's someone that could slot in and do well.
Yeah, quite. I agree. I've seen a bit of him. I think his market value is the most of any player that's actually coming to the club, which proves the point there, I think, that you're making. Now, the two teams you've got here in 11th and 12th place, I'm going to put them together a bit because there is a little bit of a link between them, actually, certainly from a managerial front. You've got Brommapojkarna and Sirius. Now, the two things that both clubs have in common is they head into this season under new managers. So, there's a question mark. You just mentioned there, if in doubt, sometimes you go with the proven manager. Well, we've not really got in terms of proven managers here, have we? Certainly not compared to last season anyway. Talk to me about these two clubs. I do believe that the former co-manager of Brommapojkarna is now in charge at Sirius.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's where me and Irma Helen break away, I'm afraid, in terms of our predictions, because the media and her prediction in that sense, the Discovery Plus, I think, reporter, they have gone for Brommapojkarna in 13th, and I've gone for them in 11th. Obviously, last season they finished 10th. And, of course, they've gone for Sirius in 11th, and I've gone for 12th. Of course, Sirius last season finished 9th, so we're slightly different in our opinions on these two teams. Steve, I'll start with Brommapojkarna. Like you said, they've got a manager. Funnily enough, obviously, Mellberger's gone, the former Aston Villa centre-back. And, they've gone with... and also their assistant, obviously, and they've gone with Ulf Christiansen, who I don't know a huge amount about, I'll be honest. He's a manager that sort of, he's got a bit of a track record. Apparently he's meant to be decently rated. He's been in an under-19s team. He's been manager at women's football, I think. He managed Hammarby TFF as well. He's been a video analyst for IFK, so he's been around the block, but I don't know, in terms of his track record, I don't know a huge amount about him managerially. I think this will be one of his biggest jobs for sure so far, and a big test for him. In terms of the squad, Steve, I think that they've got a few wins. I think Victor Lind is a player that I quite like. He is someone that I think I earmarked him a few seasons ago. I think he might have been in my 10 to watch, in fact, a few seasons ago. And he's come in from Midtjylland. One thing about Brommapojkarna, they have the best academy probably in Sweden, if not Europe. They've got one of the best academies, I'd say, in Europe. Certainly one of the most unknown, if that makes sense, if you compare it to like the likes of Ajax and Chelsea. But I think they produce players for days. Funnily enough, Steve, we talk about fantasy just then. They've actually got a player that is in my fantasy team who is going to leave before he's even played a single game, because 16-year-old Love Arhov, who looked really good in pre-season, by the way, is someone who I would have loved to have in my 10 to watch. He's that good, coming from their youth team. that Eintracht Frankfurt have already slapped in, I think, a £5 million bid for him, or roughly that. At least anyway, big money. And it looks like he'll be leaving this weekend. So he was not in the squad today against BK Häcken, and it looks like he's off. So, blink and you miss it, basically, like the Grandpa Simpson meme. He's gone. In terms of the squad, yeah, I mentioned Hovland's come in with a bit of experience at the back. Callis here, they've still got actually quite an elderly backline, to be fair. And then they've got a few young players like Oscar Cotton. He's another one from their academy that I think will be one to potentially keep eyes on. They've got Davor Blažević in goal. They've got a lot of experience, to be fair, in the backline, which I think will help BP. Because if there's one thing about Bromma, they have so many good academy talents that sometimes I think they find it quite difficult. And I think that's why I've got them to be a little bit higher this season. I just think that the experience they've got together with that youth is quite a good blend in terms of the squad. They've also brought in Serge and Goali, who's previously Hammarby midfielder. He's 33 now, veteran from Salzburg, and he's someone as well who played, and I think he'll just offer a bit of grit and a bit of experience, which they kind of need to balance out some of the players that I think will, the younger players, the likes of Wilmar Alderfalk, who's a very highly rated talent, the likes of Dalia Højrundust, who's 26 now, to be fair. He's getting on in his years, but he can be a bit hit and miss. Timothy Anderson now, 24, the former Bayern Munich man. He's someone that will get a lot of game time this season, but a lot we expected him. The big issue for them, Steve, and it's a real shame because he had such a good season last year, and he looked like he might even get a big move at his veteran years. You talked about who was it that you talked about? Former Malmö, Joe Ingeberget, on the Itinerary podcast, and Vasic is a similar kind of player, in my opinion, in terms of how, as a veteran, he's sort of almost aging like a fine wine. 33 years old, and he was the top scorer in the league. And then that's literally second last game of the season, Steve. He does his cruciate ligament. Just such a shame for him. And, we hope to see him back soon. Obviously, he's been out for probably about 6 months now, I think. So hopefully we'll see him this season, but, it's not going to be maybe till the summer, it looks like, at least, or, maybe after. I think they're going to miss his goals, to be honest. And they brought in Nabil Bahoui. He's also 34, so they have gone quite old, Steve. I think one player to look out for in terms of young talents is Evans Botchway. He could be one to keep an eye on, 19-year-old winger. But all in all, I think they've got enough to have an okay season.
Yeah, apparently Nikola Vasic was in negotiations with Hammarby before the injury occurred. But apparently he's well ahead on his schedule for a return, and he should be in full training at the end of June. That would be like getting a new player back, won't it, for them? Mid-season there for Brommapojkarna. Lost the first game, of course, against Häcken, but we shouldn't really downgrade them too much for that. That is never a game they were favoured to really get a result in, and they weren't that bad in it anyway, to be honest with you. In terms of Sirius, funny side. Of course, you once famously absolutely went crazy on them, didn't you? One time. One of the most famous rants on Nordic football podcast history. Tend to be involved in a lot of high-scoring games, especially at home, Jonathan. That's how I perceive them as. Whether or not that changes this season, you've got them there in 12th place. I mean, could they feasibly even get sucked into a relegation battle, do you think? Or realistically, should they be all right?
Well, this one's, you've got Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, Steve. This one's a bit like Sirius and the Talent Factory. I think the Oompa Loompas have come along, Steve, and every one of their members is, Augustus Gloop, and all the rest of them have sort of left the squad because the Talent Factory has dried out in the last window. I mean, look at the players that they've lost. Yusuf Salech, who's gone to Cardiff, the Danish Palestinian, and by the way, €4 million. They got a good price for him, to be fair. With one season in the league, and he's actually just done quite well in the Championship, hasn't he? He's taken to the Championship quite quickly. He's done his trajectory's gone way quicker than I expected. If I'm being completely honest, I thought it'd take more time to adapt. Malcolm Yeng's gone. He's someone that we've always talked about. He's only 19, but he's gone to Stade Reims in France, 2.5 million. Oli Valu Ormuson's gone, 100k, and then a few others like Tananda, Steve, the goalkeeper, who I quite liked. He's gone to Cremonese in Italy. So, Steve, it's like Charlie and the Talent Factory. They've lost all these big names that they sort of you looked at and sort of thought about as the big players in that club. They've still got a few that they can look at, and they've also recruited. I think Ismail Diawara is a goalkeeper I've always quite liked. They've signed him from Oiko. They brought in a couple. I mean, the biggest signing is Scottish centre forward Robbie Ur from Anderlecht Futures. I don't know much about him, but he's a striker, and they've got a good track record with strikers, to be fair. Sirius in recent years. I know they've got, I think, a new chief scout behind the scenes. They've brought in a few people. So, the recruitment, I'm not going to criticize their recruitment because it's been pretty good in recent years, and I don't know much about this kid. But hey, a Scotsman in the Allsvenskan, Steve, that's quite rare, isn't it? They've still got the likes of Melker Haya, who I think is going to be someone that will, if he's not getting the move, he's definitely going to be a contender, and it will be very highly rated. Joachim Persson, I thought he would have left by now, to be fair. I think he's had a really good sort of 2 years. Leo Walter, I think he's going to have a really big season as well. So they have got some talent in there. Jakob Volkering Persson. I think the Georgian Sabah Mamatsashvili will probably get a bit more game time. 22-year-old. So they do have a sort of an okay squad, Steve. Where I have maybe obviously question marks. Noah Millerskog as well, by the way, is someone that he's going to be relied on. Where I have a few question marks is with the new manager, Andreas Engelmark. Funny enough, I've met him twice, and he, Steve, was part of the backroom team at Brommapojkarna along with Sean Constable. He was actually Sean Constable's assistant at that point. And I think Sean will have a few things to say about him. Obviously, they worked together. Good friend of the pod, Sean Constable. And then he obviously was joint manager / assistant with Melberg at Brommapojkarna. He's stepped away from the shadows now. He was at Brommapojkarna for 5 years, and he's gone into his own right as a manager. So it'll be very interesting to see how he does. Obviously, he's won his first 2 games in the Swedish Cup, lost 1. And, he's a young manager, 41 years old, quite serious, takes his football seriously. And I think that he's got like an analyst background, came through as an analyst, and he was academy manager, that kind of thing. He's done a lot of different kind of jobs, and eventually he's now got the top job, Steve. And I don't know how he'll do, but this will be a big test for him, and it'll be interesting to see, was he the brains behind Melberg, or what can he mastermind? I think in terms of the two clubs, I think that Sirius, I might be being a bit harsh on them, to be fair, in terms of 12, because they could do a lot better. They finished 9th last year, but I was a bit surprised they finished 9th. And also, Steve, I was quite surprised they let their other manager go. It seemed like they just fell out with him and just were like, right, see you later. He came out before he was even sacked and said, I think I'm going to be sacked publicly. And he was like, they're not replying to my texts or my calls. And I don't know really why that was, because I don't think he did that bad a job. I thought Sirius on that day are very entertaining to watch. So they've obviously fallen out behind the scenes there, and he's gone. And I just think that maybe it will be tough for them to replace some of the players that they've lost. But it's a squad with talent, but question marks over the manager maybe in terms of what can he get out of them. That's my main concern.
Yeah, I like the goalkeeper. I like Ishmael Diawara. He's a sort of goalkeeper who could easily win like Save of the Season award. He has quite a high eccentricity, very capable of some clangers as well, or not clangers, but sort of dramatic things. But he's got good reflexes. He can make some good saves. They've got some really streaky players as well. Joachim Persson actually doesn't have a bad statistical goal record. On his day, he can be, well, not unplayable, but he can be really in the zone, in the mood. And the starting striker is going to be Noel Milliskog. A lot of question marks about them. It looks to me like there's quite a range of positions they perhaps could be. But I think from what we've seen the results in pre-season of the Cup, they may well still be entertainers. Hopefully they are. I enjoyed watching them, Sirius, the last season. They're a good watch at home, especially you say in front of their own fans there. You got them in 12th position. Right now, we're into that bottom 4. 4 teams that you're predicting, 13th through to 16th here, Jonathan. We're going to talk relegation battle now. Tell us in what order you've got these teams, and we'll go through them bit by bit. See who's got the best chance of surviving, who also might be in some serious trouble this season.
Yeah, so I've gone for in the. Do you want me to say the whole bottom 4, or?
Yeah, we'll do the whole bottom 4 now. Put them out of their misery.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'll tell you who I think is safe, and that's Värnamo, and then we'll go bottom 3. How about that?
Okay,
let's talk about Värnamo.
We'll go into Värnamo, who, of course, survived with in the relegation playoff match last season. They just hung on by the skin of their teeth, tended to lack goals. You've got them, in complete safety here at 13th, Jonathan. So a step up for them this time around. What makes you think they can avoid that playoff this time around?
They're an interesting one because obviously the media has got them, I think, in 15th, so they think they'll go down. And if you looked at the behind the scenes in pre-season, you'd probably think they're going to go down. Chaos all over the place wherever you look, Steve, in terms of the players. They lost Gustav Engvall, of course, he's gone to Poland. They've lost a few others like Marcos Bustos, Jonathan Rashid, the goalkeeper. A few others that they've lost in terms of, Samuel Cotto, who was on loan. Nastrom has gone as well. But I think where I'm quite worried about them, Steve, excuse me, it's not, ironically, it's not the players that they've lost or signed, it's the players that are staying. I'm concerned about it, but I also think that they give me confidence to think they'll stay up. So hear me out on this one. First, I think the manager, Ferran Sibble, I mean, he's 36, but he's a veteran compared to some of them now, isn't he? I mean, this league is full of young managers, Steve. I think he's a decent manager. So I think there's the potential there that he will be an impact maker. Let's get to the sort of players that are staying and why I'm worried. So if you look at I would say two of their best players, Steve. John Bosco Kalu, who got quite a few goals last season. I think he was one of their top scorers, if not their top scorer. And Venderson, the Brazilian, Steve. Literally both of them spent the entire winter break trying to get out of the club. Kalu went public and almost begged to be allowed to leave. I think he had some offers from abroad and he was like, I need to leave. Apparently the salary he's on is just really, really low. And he complained publicly about it. And Venderson, Steve, it's been no secret about the fact that Hammarby, Kim Hellberg wants to sign him. He worked with him at Värnamo, and he wants him at Hammarby. They're desperate to get him, and I think they've made a few bids for him. But Värnamo have turned it all down. So when you've got players, Steve, who want to leave, it's always a gamble. I think that the media kind of have a perception on it that they'll sulk and that they sort of maybe that will help them make them go down. I actually think you can flip this, Steve, a little bit, and I think that they might have something to prove because they are going to know that that the only way they're getting out of that football club is if they perform. And I think that actually might work in their favour, Steve. I think Kalu and Venderson could be players to watch this year in terms of they know that Värnamo are going to be hard to deal with. And so no matter how much they cry and sulk, the only way to get out is basically to play so well that an offer comes in that they can't refuse. And so I think it could go one of two ways. And I'm predicting that they'll actually, both of them, be really focused, at least for the first first few months till the summer. After the summer, Steve, if the more bids come in and they're not allowed to leave, then I think it could go the other way because there's only so long you can keep unhappy players. But I think for the first few months, I'd like to think they're going to be really focused. Sibler is a decent manager. And then you look at some of the players they've got, Steve, and they do actually have some good players, in my opinion, for this level. Players like Victor Larsson, who I think is a good player. Grosdanic is not bad at the back. I think the defence is okay, if not spectacular. They've got some solid campaigners like Lohi Kanga, Saxo Björnstrom. Luke Leroux, I think, is a decent sort of pickup. He's coming from Volendam, and obviously he's been at Varberg Boys, hasn't he, Steve, the South African. Simon Tern, the veteran, of course. He came out at the back end of last season and literally slammed the whole club, didn't he? He basically told the players, you're all a joke, more or less, because, he thought that some of them weren't committed enough when they were in that relegation battle. But he still stuck around and he's a bit of a character. Players like, I think Ishak Abdul Razak is a decent signing. His career's not really gone how it was expected, has it? He got a big money move to Anderlecht from Norrköping, went to Häcken, didn't do much, and now he's found himself at Värnamo. So I think it's a big season for him to sort of start to prove himself. Kalle Johansson is another one, a few others. But yeah, I think all in all, Steve, I think with the manager and those two players, key players, Kalu and Venderson, with players like Tern, who's been around the block, and Luke Leroux, I think they've just about got enough. I think they'll win some games. I think there'll be weeks where they take beatings, Steve. I think they're going to be the kind of team that they either get a good solid win or they get bad, if you get what I mean. I think they'll take a few batterings because I think personality-wise, I just think I'm not sure if the whole squad's in harmony and fighting in the same direction. But I think they'll just about stay up.
They had the worst home record in Allsvenskan last season, but the fifth best away record. Their actual home ground, which is called Finnvedsvallen. This place is an absolute dive.
By the way, yeah. I don't want to, sorry to interrupt you, but that's actually a massive reason that their home record's been so bad. They've actually renovated their stadium. So it's worth mentioning that. It's good that you mentioned that. because it's been renovated. They had to play quite a few games last season on neutral ground, right? So they didn't even get to play at the stadium. But that's one thing I've forgotten to mention is that, they've renovated the stadium, and the expectation is that the conditions are a lot better now. Really? So that could potentially help them in terms of home record.
Yeah, that half the problem is, quite a few of their games ended up in Boras, Elfsborg's ground. So maybe that will help them now. The average goals per game in their away matches was 1.9, the lowest of any team in the league. A lot of under 2.5 goal games away. Värnamo, you've got them surviving this season. You are right. There are some players in the squad which are not bad. I remember watching the relegation playoff against Landskrona. Honestly, there was night and day between the actual quality levels. All right, that is a Super Retten team, but it does prove the point that perhaps they were better than 14th last season, really, if we're being honest. Okay, then, bottom three. We've not even talked about any of the promoted clubs yet, so we know they're in there. What order have you got this bottom three this season?
Well, if you've not heard your team yet, then it means that you've got a 66% chance of going down. So let's take it away, according to me anyway, not that I'm the expert, but we'll take it away, Steve. I'll spit it out. Two teams I think will go down, Östers and Halmstads, and I think Degerfors are the ones that will be in the trapdoor. I think they'll be in the relegation playoffs. And I think it's going to be a really good relegation playoff, by the way, because there's some good teams at Super Red now, with Kalmar down there, Västerås still down there. I think they're a good side. And a few others like Ogri, who I think are going to maybe have a good season in Super Red. So we could have a really tasty relegation playoff, but I think it will be Degerfors in there, and I'm backing Halmstad to go down.
I mean, Degerfors 14th there. Is there a sort of a difference between them and the bottom two that you're predicting, which gives you more hope for them? I'm kind of insinuating maybe they've got a few more goals in them, because that could be a possibility there that I'm thinking that you might. I mean, they're coming up, Degerfors, straight back up to be Allsvenskan for them. I mean, the last time they were in the league, I can't remember. There was at times I think we quite liked them, and other times we were like, it would do them good to go down. Well, now they've gone down, they've come back up. Are they going to give it a better go this time around?
Yeah, I mean, apart from Sirius, Degerfors are the ones who've had the biggest rants from me in this podcast history. I mean, I remember some games, Steve. Remember, I think there was a 6-0, wasn't there, against Elfsborg, which was a disgrace. I don't even want to think about it, to be honest. Like there are some weeks in that relegation season that they were pitiful. But it's good to see them back, to be fair. Degerfors, they've got a bit of character about them. I like the ground. They do have a bit of they've had a few good players who've gone on as well, haven't they, that they've sold to bigger clubs. They bring a bit of character about them still. I quite like Degerfors, to be fair. So welcome back. I'm looking forward to seeing how they do. I think they've got a good chance. And I think you've hit the nail on the head at the end of the day. I think it is goals, Steve. I think that is the differentiator for these three teams. I think Östers are a bit more of an unknown quantity, and I think we're starting to see a bit of a gap, aren't we, between Superettan and Allsvenskan. Teams are starting to struggle a little bit when they come up. Look at Västerås, how well they did in terms of XG, but they just couldn't stay in the league. We interviewed their manager at the back end of last season, and eventually they went down, no matter how well they performed towards the back end of the year. And Halmstad, I'm not convinced they've got the goals that they need. The difference with Degerfors is I think they've made some good signings. I think Marcus Rafferty from Hammarby is a good signing. I think he's got a lot to offer, potentially. If he can get some more game time and start to establish himself, I think that could be a smart pickup. Steve, it's another team that's rated odd. Leon Heen has come in at centre-back. I think he's related to Isaac Heen, who was...
his brother, I think.
Yeah, who's did so well for Djurgården and then was sold to Italy, wasn't he? I think he's gone on to be a Swedish international now. I don't know much about how he did at Odd, Steve. Obviously, he got relegated there, but, he's only 23 years old, and I think he could be interesting. They've got Sebastian Olsson, as I mentioned. They signed a kid called Elias Barsum from Örebro, and also a Ghanaian winger called Ziad Salifu. So they've got a few options there. They've lost one of their main players, obviously, Gustav Lindgren, has gone to Peterborough for about 600k, which is an interesting one. I don't know if anyone from Peterborough scouting department listens to this podcast. If you do, drop us a message. Lost a few others as well that have sort of helped them get promoted. But yeah, I just think that, like you said there, Steve, I think the big thing for me is that they've got more goals potentially than the other two teams. I think the squad is decent, and if you look at the kind of players that they do have in that squad, as it comes to goals, I think Rafferty can contribute potentially. Then I think Elias Fieldstrom is an 18-year-old who could have something about him. Omar Faraj is going to be the big one. He's come home from where was he out? He was in Zamalek in Egypt, and he's a striker that can get goals. I think at this level on his day. So they've got a few others like Netabai who are experienced, Gravius. So yeah, I think it will be close. The squad's not stacked, to be fair, and I think if they get a few injuries, that's where I would really worry about them. But also their manager, 32 years old, Steve, William Lundin, and he's done a really good job so far. But another really young manager. But I think if you just compare the forward options compared to the other two, I feel a little bit more confident that Degerfors can score more goals, have maybe a slightly better home record, and that might keep them up.
The thing with Halmstad, one thing I will say for them in their favour is they do have quite a good home advantage. It's a place that no one likes to go, a grass pitch, often cuts up a bit. Again, you often get a lot of low-scoring games there for Halmstad. Their away form was awful last season. They have the second worst away record, 10 points obtained out of 15, 1 win, 11 defeats. They really do rely a lot on their home form, and they're going to need to find some goals, aren't they, Halmstad? That is a big concern for them. There is hope that Yannick Agnero could be potentially a good option for them. But if he can't get them goals, it could be the sort of season where we see them completely toothless.
Yeah, I think with Halmstad, you've mentioned there about the home record, and they can be good, but I just, even their veterans are getting really old now, and kind of, I just look at the squad and it's like, I look at, for example, the team that played and lost 3-0 against Mjällby in the Swedish Cup, and I think there's a real dearth of quality there, really. There's some okay players that are kind of borderline Allsvenskan level, just about Allsvenskan level, but there's some really unproven players. I think they're going to need big seasons, the likes of Trupala, Valentin, I think is still a bit to prove, maybe. Mayimpa, there's just, even Agnero, he's a young player, but I think there's, to have that much responsibility on his shoulders is difficult. Blair Turgott is a good player, but just obviously with the injuries he's had, the Englishman, we wish him well, but, he's now in his 30s. So when I look at the squad, I just think I'm looking around for like who's going to win them games, and Tim Ronning in goal is a decent goalkeeper. I know you like your keepers, Steve. They've got a young defender called Bleon Kurtulus. I think he's related to the former Hammarby player. He's 17 years old, and I think he's a talent, to be fair. But I'm quite worried about this squad. I just don't see the real quality that they're going to need to stay up. The sort of past history of them where they're quite good at home, that was always built on a really solid defense, and just you knew that they would pick up something up front, but they would also keep it quite tight at the back. But when you look at it, Steve, they've lost Svedberg, they've lost Nielsen, the goalkeeper, obviously they lost Hedenberg. A lot of players have gone. Wiedersheim Paul, obviously, you could argue his impact, but they've shipped him out. Thomas Boyacki, I thought he was always quite good in spells. Joseph Baffo, Andreas Johansson has retired. He's 42 now. He managed to put together a season in his 40s last year, but I mean, he's older than half the managers in this league now. He's retired, and that's a massive loss in terms of the dressing room. So that is a big loss in terms of mentality as well. And I think when you used to be able to rely on Halmstad in terms of that mentality to get them over the line, I think they've lost that now in that back line with those 3 departures. And so I really am struggling to see who pulls them through.
And the final team, I think they're pronounced Öster. First time we've ever talked about them on this Nordic football podcast. They returned to the Allsvenskan first time since 2013. I was interested to look back at their history. They've actually won 4 Allsvenskan titles around about the 80s. So there's quite a pedigree in the past for them here, but could be quite a difficult task for them this season, Jonathan. You've got them down in 16th position.
Yeah, it could be Öster eggs all over the place this season. Who knows? But firstly, we've got to say welcome back. Like you said, they are actually a traditionally big club. So, IF, I think it's pronounced maybe. 4 titles. They've won cups as well. They are quite a big team, really. And yeah, that has to be, we have to like mention their Superettan run last season to get promoted. That is worth praise in itself. The squad, I think there's quite a few unknown quantities, and what I've learned in the last few years is that the Superettan, it can be a bit of a big jump. They have got a few names that we know from the past, Steve, who have sort of been in the league and then maybe dropped out of it. Vladimir Rodic, Christian Kouakou, for example, he's got a bit to prove. He's actually a decent striker on his day. Alibak Eliev, players that stick out. David Sega, I think he's not bad on his day. He used to be at Örebro, I believe. Lindahl was coming from Beko Häcken. Kingsley Gyamfi is coming from Hammarby. There's a few, Chris Sack. There's a few players that we've seen in the past, but I'm not sure, if I'm being honest. I think that it's going to be a tough ask for them. I don't think they're necessarily maybe sort of get battered everywhere they go, but I think it could be tough for them. The most interesting thing really about them, Steve, is obviously the English manager, Martin Foyston. So I think that is going to be an interesting one, and he's getting quite a young manager, but he's got English citizenship and used to be an analyst, I believe, at Fulham. So that is a very interesting one, isn't it? And maybe, in terms of, like you said, interviewing people on this podcast, I don't know if he's outright English, but I think he was born in England. So I don't know. I don't really know his history, if I'm being totally honest, in that sense. But yeah, he's born in Hull, so certainly he's got a good track record and promotion under his belt. So let's see how he does.
Yeah, I'm just looking at him now. Video analyst at Fulham, assistant manager at Djurgården, Norway, Strømsgodset, Finland under-21 assistant manager, Häcken assistant manager. He's certainly done the rounds as an assistant. And then in his first full job, really, 36 matches for Östers, 1.83 points per game, got on promoted. This could be a lad to watch out for, to be honest with you, Martin Foyston. I'm just looking at the squad now. In fantasy, not a single one of their players is owned by more than 1.9%. I don't think I've ever known anything that low. Because usually in these poor squads, there's someone really underpriced and people will take a gamble of them be like 10% owned. But that may be a sorry state of affairs. Maybe they can surprise. Maybe they can surprise us. It looks like this Foyston plays 4-3-3. Let's see how they get on, Östers. Good luck to them in this Allsvenskan. It is a big jump. We've got to say that. Between Superettan to Allsvenskan, unless you've got the resources, it's a tough ask. And that ultimately might be their undoing, Jonathan, because we do know that gulf is quite big.
Yeah, and Foyston, I think, is a Per Mattis Hogmo kind of understudy, in a similar to way that I said about Falcon. Learning under Rydström, it looks like, looking into Foyston's background, he came through with Hogmo at different various jobs before sort of breaking away on his own. So, if he's never listened to this podcast, Steve, I'd be a bit upset, because if he's been out there and is an Englishman, we're not doing our marketing right if he's never been heard it. But we definitely got to track him down, I think, to get him on the show if he's an English manager, Steve, because there's not that many of them in Sweden, is there? So we've had Ian Birchnell, we've had Michael Jolly. We didn't get Graham Potter in, did we? Although he did email us once and we missed it. That's for another day. But yeah, I think with Östers, there will be a couple of names that pop up and start to do well at some point. But I think it's going to be a real tough ask for Martin Foyston. I think he's going to have to pull out all stops. I don't know about their budget as well to be able to recruit. They're going to need really smart recruitment in the summer, I believe. Yeah, it's going to be an uphill climb for them, I think.
Well, that concludes the season podcast. Brilliant work there, Jonathan, getting through all these teams. I will go through your predicted table now. Malmö in first, Hammarby second, Djurgården third, Elfsborg fourth, Häcken fifth, IFK in sixth, Mjällby seventh, IFK Göteborg in eighth, Norrköping in ninth place, GAIS in 10th, Brommapojkarna in 11th, Sirius 12th, Värnamo in 13th place, Degerfors 14th, and Halmstads 15th, and Östers in 16th position. Great work, my man. Any final comments and thoughts before we conclude the show?
If you enjoyed our two podcasts, pre-season previews, head to patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast and feel free to sort of purchase a subscription maybe. That will give us a coffee or a beer. And yeah, the only other thing I'd say is I think it'll be an exciting season. I think, like we said there, the managers are all quite young these days, aren't they? And I think it's more of an enterprising league. I think people will try things, and I think it's going to be a really interesting year ahead, Steve.
Yeah, remember, join the Allsvenskan Fantasy League. Code to join 20C901. But from this edition of the Nordic Football Podcast, stay tuned for more episodes over the forthcoming weeks. Hope you enjoyed the season preview podcast. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much for listening or watching. See you next time.